Okay, we can get started. Thank you, everybody. Welcome to the May 13th, 2024 meeting of the Town of Niskayuna Planning Board and Zoning Commission. Ms. Bergami, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Laflamme?
Here.
Ms. Strang?
Here.
Mr. Khan?
Here.
Ms. Blah, oh, nope. Ms. Gomes?
Here.
Mr. Darpino?
Here.
Ms. Gold?
Present.
Our Chairman Welsh?
Here. Thank you. All right, we have the approval of the minutes from the April 29th, 2024 meeting. Have a motion to approve those minutes?
So move, Chairman.
Moved by Mr. Laflamme for approval. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Khan. Corrections? I got a couple of minor ones. Whenever Trish is ready. I got a couple minor things. Page 1, line 15, Clark Henry was not here. Just to clarify that. And then on page 9, line 369. I'm trying to scroll to it myself here. 369. Where is it? I'm getting there. 369. It says Mr. Lee asked what is needed to meet their current size requirements. This is regarding the Chinese, what's it called? I'll get it.
Church?
Fellowship Church.
Yeah, the church, fellowship, Chinese Fellowship Church. So that wasn't Mr. Lee. That was either Mr. Chen or Mr. Kramer.
6369.
Right. And the other thing is also, please check spelling of Mr. Kramer. I see the agenda statement had a C and the minutes has a K. And so you can take a look at that also and get the correct one for Kramer, right? So Mr. Kramer, strike Mr. Chen and replace that with, or excuse me, strike Mr. Lee and replace that with either Mr. Chen or Mr. Kramer. And get the spelling correct, okay? All right, that's all the corrections I had. Anybody else have any other corrections? All right, I guess to keep it clear, I'm going to make a motion that we modify the minutes with those three changes I just suggested. Can I have a second on that? Second. Seconded by Mr. Laflamme. All those in favor of modifying the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, we have modified set of minutes. Any other questions, comments on the minutes? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor of approval of the modified minutes from April 29th, 2024, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any abstentions or anything? No? Okay, April 29th, 2024 meeting minutes are approved. No public hearings tonight, so move the privilege of the floor. Anyone wishing to be heard regarding any planning and zoning matters in the town of Niskayuna, please come to the microphone, state your name and address for the record. We'll listen to what you have to say. So privilege of the floor is open. Anybody here in attendance like to speak?
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Laura Scordino. I live at 1240 Milton Keynes Drive in Niskayuna. So I live next door to the Airbnb, or the short-term rental rather, that we've been talking about at 1230 Milton Keynes. So first of all, I want to thank you guys all for taking on this task of trying to figure out the appropriate regulations for this moving forward. After last meeting, I sent an email to Laura Robertson. Hopefully she sent that to you guys. It was a little bit long-winded, so sorry about that. But really what I wanted to try to talk to you guys today, I know that you're going to talk about the North Elba regulations, which I've been looking through. It seems like they have some positives and ways to try to limit the short-term rentals. I mean, I think really what it comes down to is that in the residential areas of Niskayuna, people probably don't really want to have these short-term rentals. And being somebody who lives next door to this currently, I can tell you that I don't. But I think that the average Niskayuna resident does not want to have this next door to them or in their neighborhood. So, I mean, you guys have to figure out the regulation to try to, have this be smooth going forward. Right now, there's not a ton of these short-term rentals, but I think that if, they are successful, that you will see more of these. So versus kind of like trying to micromanage it from you guys from a logistical standpoint, like that's going to happen at night and on the weekends. So trying to have, paying for town people to be managing that, I think is going to be challenging. And I also think that most people, when they're trying to make money off of something, are probably going to find their various ways to work around it or push the envelope. And it's going to be really hard to enforce. And you're kind of people like me who live next door to it, calling and complaining and trying to figure that out seems challenging. So for the good of Niskayuna and for like what is like most, like you guys work really hard to try to have this comprehensive plan for Niskayuna and like try to protect the neighborhoods and like the residents. And I like truly think that there's very little that affects people on their daily life when they're like home, not working, trying to enjoy themselves and their families, than something as disruptive as having a short-term rental next door to them. So what I would ask of you guys is when you're trying to make these laws moving forward is that they're like really effective. I think if it's any kind of wiggle room, they're going to be like really pushed and really hard to enforce. So I think to me, it seems like the easiest way or the most effective way is to really limit the number of short-term rentals that you have. And probably the most effective way of really limiting the number of short-term rentals that you have is by making it not monetarily like beneficial for people, because nobody's going to want to buy these expensive houses and rent them out if people aren't going to rent them for 30 days. They're going to rent them night to night, which is what's happening on the weekends to, have these get-togethers and these parties. So from my standpoint, what would make the most sense is to just limit it to no short-term rentals in zoned residential areas of Niskayuna. And I think that that's hard. And I appreciate, that Laura Robertson has said that that's hard and you can't just like totally shut it down. But I mean, I guess I would like try to really spend some time and try to figure out how you can work around it. I know that in Syracuse, they have some towns around there that apparently call these businesses, which they seem like are modern businesses. So they're not in residential areas. And in my opinion, and I think that this is like fair to say, when people buy a house for the sole purpose of renting it out to make money off of it, it's very similar to a business. So when they're on these rental platforms to be rented every single day of the year, but particularly every weekend of the year, that is a business. And, we'd mentioned before that trying to just limit to, if you live in the house, then you can rent it out. That also seems really difficult because these people are telling the town that they live there and they don't. Like someone stays there occasionally, but they do not live there. And clearly you can't live in a house and rent it out every single weekend. Like that's just not realistic. So I think that you can get into the weeds of like how many rooms and how many cars and all that. And I guess if like that's really where it ends up, I would say limit it to like 2 rooms or something, because when you rent it out to 6 rooms, 2 persons a room, that becomes 16 people. And when you rent it out to 16 people, that's a party like right off the bat. And so like, here's a house that everybody knows is a problem. The town knows it, Airbnb knows it, and it's still having parties all the time. So if you make regulations that aren't restrictive enough, it's going to be the same deal. So what I would vote for, if I had any opinion on it, is to make it so that it's not in residential areas. If people want to have a business, they certainly can have a business, but have that in the commercial zones. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else here wishing to be heard? Okay, Laura, any communications or anybody online?
I don't have any communications, so let me just check online. No, we have no one online.
You have no one online? Okay, seeing no one here or anyone online, I'll close privilege of the floor. Thank you. We have one resolution under unfinished business. That's resolution 2024-14. This is a resolution for site plan approval of a tenant change to a convenience store smoke shop at 3905 State Street. I think, Dave, want to make a motion on this resolution? I don't think we need to read it because we read it last time.
Okay, so moved, Mr. Chairman.
Move that we table the resolution.
Correct.
Okay, so we're going we haven't had a chance to talk to the applicant, and there's we can have a short follow-up discussion after we disposition this resolution. But a motion is by Dave DiArpino. We table this resolution. Have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Khan. Okay, all those in favor of tabling the resolution tonight, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, hearing none opposed, we'll table the resolution
Yep.
as we did last meeting, and applicant's been unavailable.
Yeah, I think it's important that the applicant.
Yeah, we got
has a meeting.
some significant things. We want to make sure we have a chance to talk to the applicant, all right? And Dave, you sent some pictures. You want to at least talk about what you found out looking at the front parking at the
Sure.
site?
So Flora wants to bring up that photograph. I took a full-size vehicle and parked it on State Street. So a couple observations. One is the distance that a vehicle away from the building does allow just enough room to walk in front of it. It almost aligns with the edge of the sidewalk. So a lot of the driveways along State Street don't have actual concrete sidewalks that go through the paved areas. But I think in this instance, this building is probably the closest building on State Street as far as off or front street parking. The parking lot in the back is it's an okay size, but there is a tight alley that runs along the left-hand side. The other thing you can see from this photograph is there's a large sign on some 4x4 posts that is very distracting when trying to back out. So I think any resolution would have to get rid of that monument sign as well. If you take a look at the second photograph, that's just the other vantage point looking up the street.
Yep.
There it is. Oh, can you go to the second one? There it is. So you can see if you're trying to back out, that monument sign is right in the way. And you
Yep.
can see exactly how much space there's left there when you try to put a car up on the front. And I'd say you might be able to get 5 spaces up there, and one would have to be handicap accessible with a side lot to it. So it's going to be tight.
Yeah, and it looks like, they already had a facade sign, at least the old business that was there. So if we, let them have this facade sign, appropriate size facade sign, and get rid of that sign. I mean, doesn't need to have it twice
Ye-
anyway, right?
Yeah, but I think a lot of these businesses on State Street over there, they've got the monument style sign because traffic, it's in the line of sight of traffic, right? For people to locate the store.
It would have to be lower.
Yeah.
If it was lower, then there'd be a car parked in front of it. I mean, it would only be seen on one side.
Yeah.
What, or higher?
I think there's a height restriction on how high a monument sign can be, correct?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, there is.
but the place next door on that
Has-
vantage
yeah.
point, the one right
Right.
behind it, I'm not
That
sure.
Might have been there for a while.
Yeah,
So
it's the old
Yeah.
Dwayne's Toyland.
Yeah.
Wow.
I actually have a different take on this, and I've been to the site in the past. Driving a sedan, I didn't find the sign a problem. I think it's the oversized, the higher vehicles that have the problem. Maybe a better solution would be to have them instructed to park in back.
Well, a couple of, that's one option. The other option is, talk to the applicant to see whether his intention was to keep both signs, right? Because we haven't, again, had talked to the applicant since the first time he came in. The other thing is you could restrict the parking out front to non-trucks so that, just passenger cars park in the front, because I would hope they'd be smaller than the Ford truck that's shown in the picture there. And then maybe,
4x4, right?
yeah, it's the length, it's a dual cab, so it's pretty good sized truck. Is that yours, Dave?
that's fine.
That's a good sized truck. But were you able to turn around without backing out into the road?
No, I had to back into the road.
Yeah. So if we could limit passenger cars only or something to the front yard, along with a handicap parking. I don't know if that's doable, but again, we can talk to the applicant about that.
Yeah, and I don't know what the rules are for, but I almost wonder if even if the back of your truck is sort of hanging over the crosswalk, that you would want to put paint the sidewalk crosswalk there. So it's going to discourage the cars from not pulling in all the way. They're going to hopefully try and get themselves out of the crosswalk there.
I mean, he's going to need to put up the barriers, and that's going to set the distance from the front of the store,
Mhm.
right? The walkway against the building, along the building. And
I looked at an aerial too. I didn't go down there, but I looked at an aerial. And I do agree with your assessment that this building is the closest to State Street. And it's definitely the only parking lot that I could find where the sort of the backside of the cars is really interfering with the sidewalk.
I guess not only that too, but I mean, backing out onto State Street, are there other buildings? I guess I'm gonna have to go look. Are there other buildings that have this?
Not this close. So if you back out and you're going to head westbound,
Yeah.
you can back in and you can do that. And if you can see oncoming traffic, if you want to try to back across,
Yeah, no, there's no
That's-
way. There's
Don't do that.
you can't do that because of the crest of the hill.
So, I mean, is it possible, does this plan work if there was no parking in the front?
Well, yeah, so the Complete Streets actually wondered if they could reconfigure the parking space so that the front of your truck
Mhm.
would actually be at the battery store sign. That
Parallel.
could be a handicap space and that would allow them to back in
Sure.
like behind the
Yep.
thing and then drive out. But I think you'd really probably only be able to fit one
One.
handicap space in
One
the
handicap
front.
space in the front.
Yeah, is there enough parking in the back, support the square footage of the building?
Yeah, I think they have plenty of parking in the
There's
back.
8 back there, right, or something? Recall reading.
Yeah, because I think that, that's a good solution. If they could somehow get 2 parking spots, maybe one for the owner and one handicap, if somebody's there, because the car's out front. But I guess that's up to the applicant to see if he can
Yeah.
finagle that.
Yeah, I mean, the sidewalk, overhanging to the sidewalk's one thing, but the other part is just you're promoting backing out onto State
Yeah.
Street. I don't know how it was done when the battery store were there, but this is what we have in front of us
Maybe,
now.
maybe if they're slightly diagonal, a couple spots,
Right, yeah.
that'd be another option.
It was workable.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Used it several times.
Yeah, no, I mean, understand. I guess, yeah, anything's workable if everyone's careful until the one moment when somebody's not.
All right, so we'll reach out to the applicant, see if he's available again, right? And maybe we get Dave, maybe you have to sit down, talk to him or whatever. Kind of work through the different options and the resolution, the other things that were in the tentative
Yeah.
resolution there too,
And I will note that if you're traveling on that road, especially if you're on the side of the building, the facade sign doesn't really help you. By the time you
Yeah.
can see it, you're going by it.
His
Yeah.
package, though, didn't even mention replacing the monument sign, I don't think.
Yeah, I have a hunch it's an omission,
Yeah,
not considered.
Yeah, so we could double check.
Yeah, we need to meet with the applicant.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he only mentioned the facade sign when he was here. I actually didn't even realize that there was a. I thought that monument sign was associated with Griffin Sports until we were really looking at your pictures.
Laura, did he mention when he wanted to open?
It's definitely as soon as possible.
I'm surprised he's not here. This is the second time.
well,
he
he was,
He was in California for the last meeting, but this one I thought was supposed to be back by.
I thought he said he'd be gone for a couple meetings.
Oh, he did?
was he notified?
Yeah, he was notified.
Then that's all we can do. We'll just table it until he shows up or sets up an appointment, sit down, talk about it.
Chairman Walsh, he sent us an email this afternoon asking for the link, so I'm surprised he's not on.
The length of the parking spaces?
No, the link
The
to
link.
the meeting.
Oh, the link, I'm sorry. Okay,
I need to see if he's sending me panicked emails. No.
no? All right, well, let's reach out to him and see if we can set up a meeting or whatever we need to do to work through this. Sound good? Dave?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think given that we've looked at this a couple of times and we've said a few things, I think we need to make a strong recommendation as to what we want, what we think will be most beneficial here, right? I do think parking head on State Street has got a few problems
Right.
associated with it.
That's our concern. We'll let the applicant, play around with the space he has, whether he can fit a couple with diagonal or whether he can fit 2 parallel to the face of the building or just one. We need to talk to him to see what his preference
Yeah,
is.
I mean, and then diagonal, right, which way?
Yeah, well, you could have one each way, So just saying, if just trying to help him out to get as much parking as he can, But the worst case is you have the one handicapped in front and that's it, Okay? All right. All right, that's it for unfinished business. Under new business, we have a few resolutions tonight. First resolution being 2024-17, a resolution for site plan approval for a new signage at TD Bank, 2301 Knott Street East. And I'll summarize. It's a little bit long here, bear with me. Resolved, the Planning Board and Zoning Commission has determined that the proposed sign waivers as described above would have a minimum negative effect on the aesthetics. And be it further resolved that the Planning Board and Zoning Commission does hereby grant said waivers to allow for the signage as described in the aforementioned sign drawings. And be it further resolved that the Planning Board and Zoning Commission finds the above referenced site plan meets the requirements of the zoning code and previous site plan approvals, and therefore hereby approves the site plan. Now, the waivers that we'll be looking at that are in the text is the one for the logo. You're allowed up to 30%. And since it's basically a full logo, it's 100%, so that's a 70% waiver for the logo sign. And then the other signs, 2 facade signs on a single facade. So we need to have that waiver because only one's allowed. And I think that's it for the waivers. They did modify the other signs to be the same size as was previously there.
Existing.
So that was able to minimize the amount of waivers required. All right. Have a motion to approve the TD Bank waivers and resolution.
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Strang. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mr. Khan. Any discussion?
No, I like that we were able to reduce the number of waivers required.
Yep, we reduced it. And again, we're trying to help them out. It's a tough location
Yeah,
to be seen from a major highway, I guess, and because it's in a unique spot, that mall. So this helps out the applicant also. All right. Any other discussion? No. Please call the roll.
Mr. Laflamme?
Yay?
Ms. Strang?
Yes.
Mr. Khan?
aye.
Ms. Gomes?
Aye.
Mr. Darpino?
Aye.
Ms. Gold?
Aye.
Chairman Walsh?
Aye. Resolution's approved. Sorry, Mr. Wheeler, I didn't realize you were there. How you doing?
Good, how are you? Thank you, guys.
Yeah, so we're all set on that one. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Next is, let's see, Resolution 2024-18, resolution for site plan approval for new signage at Market 32 at 2333 Knott Street East. Very similar.
And I will move that.
What's that?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'll move it.
Yeah, I'm going to read it first and we'll ask for a motion. Resolved, Planning Board and Zoning Commission has determined that the proposed sign waivers as described above and with the condition outlined below would have a minimum negative effect on aesthetics, and be it further resolved that the Planning Board and Zoning Commission does hereby grant said waivers to allow for the signage as described in the aforementioned sign drawings with the following conditions. 1, in order to protect the character of the residential properties across Knott Street and reduce any unnecessary glare from the commercial buildings, the 13 additional facade signs as shown on the south facade facing Knott Street East in the aforementioned drawing shall be non-illuminated in perpetuity. And be it further resolved, the Planning Board and Zoning Commission finds the above referenced site plan meets the requirements of the zoning code and previous site plan approvals, and therefore hereby approves the site plan with the following conditions. 1, outdoor storage. No outdoor storage or obstruction shall be allowed on the sidewalk between the main grocery store entrance and the secondary grocery store entrance to protect pedestrian passageway throughout the plaza. 2, crosswalks. Prior to completion of the building permit, crosswalks shall be striped into 6 locations identified by the planning office in the aerial map provided to the applicant labeled Knott Street site plan. 3, sidewalks. Prior to completion of the building permit, the missing section of sidewalk between the parking lot and Knott Street East identified by the planning office in the aerial map provided to the applicant labeled Knott Street site plan shall be installed to the satisfaction of the planning office. 4, landscaping. Prior to completion of the building permit, the applicant shall supply a landscaping plan for review and approval by the tree council. The landscaping beds in front of the proposed Market 32 should be refreshed. Dead or severely distressed trees within the property should be removed, and any removed trees should be replanted. And as far as the waivers go here, Market 32 facade sign requires a 74.5 square foot waiver. And that's included. The waiver is going to be granted if we approve this resolution. And then there's 13 facade signs that say, that kind of indicate the different departments within the store, the ones that are not going to be lit. Those require a waiver because only one is allowed. So there's a waiver of 12 there. And there's 6 directional signs on the site that are 6 feet in height on the drawings. And it's only allowed to be 4. So there's 2-foot waivers to go along with all those. Just want to make everybody aware of that.
Yeah.
And again, it's in the packet. All right, Ms. Gold.
So moved.
Motion for approval of Ms. Gold. Do I have a second?
A second?
And second by Mr. Laflamme. Discussion?
So just a few comments on our first condition under the first further resolved. the non-illuminated in perpetuity. It sounds awfully vague.
Yeah.
I mean, is there an intent we're going after, like turn off at night or
Oh, no, it can't be illuminated ever.
ever?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're not,
Okay.
you want, Mr. Lee, would you come up to the microphone,
Okay.
please?
All right, so, all right, I guess on second reading, now that you've said it in simpler English, I guess I understand what it means. It just sounded a little,
Well, I didn't find a similar condition, so that one was written by me. So if we do want to clarify the language, I'm not offended.
But that was a discussion we had, is that those would never be
Correct.
lighted,
Correct.
so.
I think the English of what says there communicates your intent.
Yeah.
It just puzzled me reading it for a moment.
Because if they were illuminated at some parts of the day.
Yeah,
Right.
right.
Yeah. But no, it's never.
Yeah.
And some of the other conditions are similar to conditions we have with others. Approvals probably with Chase Bank, I believe, Laura, also. Some of these, the conditions about striping and all that, are they?
So that's actually because we modified the original approval resolution. So you
Right.
only have to go to this resolution to see the totality of the
Yeah.
Market 32 change.
Yep.
So it'll include these resolutions that show no lighting to the additional facade signs, and it'll show the original conditions. And the only thing that changed was that the fifth original condition in our approval for Market 32 was that the signage would come back to us. So that one was struck
Oh,
because
gotcha.
the signage
I
was
gotcha.
addressed to the top.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yep. Any comments at all?
No,
No.
everything's fine.
Okay. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion, all? Market 32 signage? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Mr. Laflamme?
Aye.
Ms. Strain?
Aye.
Mr. Khan?
Hi.
Ms. Gomes?
Aye.
Mr. Darpino?
Aye.
Ms. Gold?
Aye.
Chairman Walsh?
Aye, the resolution's approved.
Okay, thank you very
Yeah,
much,
thank
everyone.
you.
Have a good evening.
Me too.
Have an opening date yet?
Uh, Sometime in June.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it went from end of
I
May.
know, it's beginning of
Hard
June.
over there. We've got 4 of them we're trying to open up in June.
Yeah.
And I'll just double check with Clark tomorrow because we needed to submit for a building permit in order to install the signs. And I believe that the town has everything for the building
Right
permit.
now, if the waivers are granted, you should be able to get your. permit.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
I'll just double check with him tomorrow because I
Good.
know we want to put them up as soon as we can.
Great.
All right, thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone. Have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
All right. Let's see. The next resolution is the Ingersoll. I'm gonna recuse myself from this project and step aside and let Mr. DiArpino act as chairman.
Okay, thank you. Next up is resolution number 2024-19. And this is for um, this is for the site plan review of a 16-foot by 18-foot pavilion at the property at 3359 Council Road. Read the resolution. Okay. Now therefore be it resolved that this planning board and zoning commission finds that the site plan application referenced above meets the requirements of the zoning code and previous site plan approvals and hereby approves this site plan. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Khan and second by Ms. Gold. Any discussion?
Felt it's a good addition to the place.
Yeah.
and
No.
Preserves the intent.
Okay. Ms. Bergami, please call the roll.
Aye.
Ms. Strang?
Aye.
Mr. Khan?
Aye.
Ms. Gomes?
Aye.
Mr. Darpino?
Aye.
Ms. Gold?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And good luck
Thank
with your
you.
construction.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dave. We have one more resolution tonight. That's Resolution 2024-20, resolution for site plan approval for a 777 square foot addition to the Chinese Fellowship Church at 2530 Balltown Road. And it's a pretty straightforward resolution. No, we got some, thanks, Sarah. Resolved that this planning board and zoning commission hereby determined that the project will not have a significant effect on the environment and hereby directs the town planner to file a negative secret declaration with the following comments from the Conservation Advisory Council. Consider including EV charging stations on the site and continue exploring the use of green energy practices, including solar panels, electric stoves, and energy efficient heating, cooling, and lighting. consider a pesticide-free lawn maintenance program, composting, and additional native plantings on the site. Further resolved that the Planning Board and Zoning Commission finds the above referenced site plan meets the requirements of the zoning code, and therefore hereby approves this site plan with the following conditions. 1, final landscaping and tree planting plans shall be reviewed and approved by the Niskuna Tree Council if applicable. 2, prior to site plan disturbance, the applicant shall participate in a pre-construction meeting with the town of Niskuna and shall address any concerns raised by the town. 3, prior to the pre-construction meeting, any engineering and drainage concerns will be addressed to the satisfaction of the town superintendent of water, sewer, and engineering. And B, any minor changes to the final site plans will be addressed to the satisfaction of the town planning department. Condition number 4, prior to site disturbance, the site plan drawing shall be modified to reflect agreed upon decisions of the pre-construction meeting, if any, and distributed as required to the town and to all involved contractors. Final site plan shall be submitted to the town labeled for construction. And 5, in accordance with Chapter 180 of the Soil Erosion and Sediment Control Ordinance of the town of Niskuna, the applicant shall put in place soil erosion and sediment control measures sufficient to stabilize disturbed areas. These measures shall be satisfactory to the superintendent of water, sewer, and engineering and shall remain in place until such time as natural vegetation has been successfully established. I don't believe we have a project lead for this, right? No. So can I have a motion for approval of the addition at Chinese Fellowship Church?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Strang. Do I have a second?
I second, Chairman.
All right, second by Mr. Laflamme, and we'll have some discussion. The applicant's not available tonight. I know there was some discussion, we'll clarify with the planning department. It turns out that the parking is sufficient. We thought we were short. Looks like 73 required, and they actually have 74. In addition, they do show forward bank parking because we thought they were short, but that's okay. They can leave it. They're not actually going to build those parking spots, so they can leave it on the site plan. If there's ever a future need or an addition that requires additional parking, then that's where it would come from anyway, because it looks like it's a common sense spot where it should be. But I believe we got everything in place, Laura, right? As far as the dimensions of the parking spots that, they're from the original construction, even if they weren't to coincide with what's today's standard, I guess we wouldn't be changing them. I think they got smaller, if anything.
Yeah, I think it did get smaller.
They got smaller, so if
It
they're,
used to be a 9x20,
yeah, 9 by
Yeah.
20, and now it's
9x18.
9 by 18 or something like that, yep. So if anything,
Got some very long vehicles out there.
You opposed the change.
so this predates the change, so worst case is that they're larger than what the current standard is.
Well, yeah, and I think that Clark sent them an email because we just wanted to check the width of the driving aisles and stuff like that. But I think the conditions in the resolution cover that we can make sure they add those details that we'd want to see, just to make sure that everything's okay. But it looked okay, generally speaking.
Right.
Did you want to add something to that, Clark?
Got anything, Clark, to add to that?
No, I just think the architect working on the project wasn't sure what the actual parking looks like. So I don't know that they're striped. He seemed to think that they were a variety of different sizes. So he was checking on that, but I don't think it drastically impacts the situation.
Do you think that we should add a condition that the striping get redone if it's unclear?
Let's see, does any of the conditions cover that already? Drainage?
I was wondering if we should notate the parking sufficiency for the record.
Yeah, we could.
It would make it easier next time they want to do something. We've got that.
That would probably be a whereas.
Yeah,
And it's got,
avoids confusion.
no, we can, I don't, again, it's in this resolution. If there were to be any future action, we'd probably go back to this resolution anyway, but the drawing shows the parking that's required. It says, it shows 74 spots when 73 are required, so I guess we can if we want to. But would you like to add a condition, Laura, to help you guys out? That the striping be reviewed, and if not adequate, the parking be restriped?
I think it's a good idea. We have done that on State Street multiple times. So it doesn't require, repaving or anything like that. But if the parking is kind of all over the place and not adequately striped, it's probably a good. They did update the handicap spaces. So they are going to have to repaint a little bit on on those guys anyway. So a lot of times, if we have a chance to make sure that the parking is properly delineated, it's never a bad thing.
Yeah, who would be would it be the planning department or code enforcement? Who would validate whether the striping is adequate and whether it needs to be striped?
So it's code enforcement, yeah. And when we've done that before, the one that I can think of, well, I think we'll probably do it on State Street for one. But the other one I can think of is that we made them restripe for Tangle's Saloon, the hair salon, because it was just unclear on where they were parking, and we may have done it for S&G too.
Okay. All right, so we need a sixth condition that the parking, the marking of the parking spots needs to be reviewed, and if deemed inadequate by the code enforcement, that the parking lot would need to be restriped?
Yeah.
Does that kind of summarize it? Is that adequate?
And could we somehow encapsulate the parking is sufficient, is noted on, and if that's 74, we're only 73 are required?
As long as we get those dimensions back from them, that's okay. Yeah.
I-
Maybe we could attach a memo to the resolution after it's completed that shows the final.
So it's really clear and people don't have to dig through a bunch of records to find it.
Yeah, it's just I wouldn't want to add the whereas quite yet until we get the final measurements
Yeah.
the clerk requested
Yep.
them.
No, I agree. And then the other thing is, again, you have the pre-construction meeting, so if there's a problem with, some of them are striped, some aren't, you can handle that
Yeah,
in the
so we
meeting.
can do a memo, and then the only thing is if for some reason the parking is insufficient, they'll have to come back and add the paint parking spaces because they're not specific.
Exactly, but they have them there in case
But
there's
they
an
have them
issue.
there in case
Exactly.
there's an issue.
That works out good. All right, so I'm going to make a motion that we add condition number 6, and it basically the condition says that the planning department code enforcement will review the existing marking or striping of the current parking spaces, and if inadequate, would recommend that this parking spaces be striped appropriately. Does that sound good?
Mhm.
All right.
And that the memo covering number of parking be attached.
I'll do that. I'll just do
That's separate
that.
of the
Yeah.
condition.
All right, okay, so I'll make that motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Khan. Any other discussion on the motion? All right, so we have a motion and a second to modify the resolution by adding condition to ensure that parking spots are adequately marked. All those in favor of modifying the resolution signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We have a modified resolution. Can I have a motion on the modified resolution? I'll make a motion on, how's that? Motion to approve the modified resolution. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Khan. Any other discussion? No? Okay, no, this will work out fine, and since it's a small addition, it'll be good. All right, Ms. Burgami, please call the roll.
Mr. Laflamme?
Aye.
Ms. Strain?
Aye.
Mr. Khan?
Aye.
Ms. Gomes?
Aye.
Mr. Darpino?
Aye.
Ms. Gold?
Aye.
Chairman Walsh?
Aye, the resolution's approved as amended. Thank you, everybody. All right, so that's it for new business. We'll move right to discussion items, and that's the zoning code updates, and that's the short-term rental regulations. Included in the packet was a modified version of the Elba,
North Elba. Town.
North Elba,
Lake Placid.
and Laura sent that out. I know it's hard to, for me, in the PDF, because I don't have any fancy programs at home to mark it up. I tried to highlight some things that were in the proposal just for discussion. So Laura, do you want to go page by page and see if anybody has any comments, or how would you?
Yeah, if you guys would indulge me, I think the best thing to do would be going page by page
Okay.
with some questions. Yeah.
All right, Laura, we'll wait through it. Thanks for putting this together. It was very thought provoking.
Yeah, Laura and I also talked at the beginning of that, if she could get out the Word version, it'd be
Yeah,
a
I
lot
will send
easier to
the Word.
everybody. And then no matter where we end up tonight, if we get a copy of the Word version, everybody could, welcome to mark it up and send it back to the planning office well ahead of the next meeting so that she can include it in the packet and for the next round of comments to keep it moving, okay? And she said she would do that. Let me scroll to where we're at here.
When I was looking to see if the applicant for State Street was panicking about not being able to get on, I did notice that I did get an email from someone who supported the town taking on short-term rental regulations. So I'll forward that one to you guys.
Okay.
Okay.
We're trying to find it still somewhere here.
So just one thing though, you did a kind of hybrid thing here, right? You wrote it in the context Niskuna, but it's got some cut
So
and
I
paste.
changed a fair amount of it because
Okay.
it's a little bit interesting. I didn't show what I changed out of it, but the original one I think is still attached, or it's attached to your last packet. But the code,
That's
the
the last
sample
packet, yeah.
code, it applies to both a village and a town. And so it had two different sections of regulations for the town and for the village. So I did try to get rid of all of that because that was very confusing.
Mhm.
And I did make some changes in places where it didn't make, like where it was very specific to Lake Placid. I don't know that I highlighted it, that we need to expand our why, but I didn't do that too much. So the definitions, I feel like we don't really need to look at them too much. They seem fine.
Well, except that we are now going to define a short-term rental in our code, right?
Yeah, right. We don't currently have that.
Right.
And the other thing that was interesting about these regulations, which I tried to remove, is that they were a second round. They had already adopted short-term rental regulations. And so sometimes this code referenced the already adopted short-term rental regulations and
Okay.
allowed some of the short-term licenses to be grandfathered in. So that's something to think about once you adopt this code. If you don't get it right and you go back, clearly it happened with North Elba. They were grandfathered in until they had to change something in their permit.
Okay. So one key thing is we'll now have a definition of short-term rental, and we're defining that as less than 30 consecutive nights.
Yes. And they make the difference between a short-term rental and a hosted short-term rental.
Before we get, can I ask just one question, actually a couple of questions, Mr. Hess? Based on the comments at the privilege of the floor tonight, is that something, that's, the town has the capability of doing, of removing it from, R1, R2, R3, RR40, RR80, so that any of the remaining zoning districts would be okay to do, is that an option?
I'm not sure. My concern is that we run the risk of not having it be allowed anywhere, which is definitely not the case. You can't do that, right? So if there are no.
Laura, you might have him turn his microphone on.
Oh, is it on, Rob?
Oh.
Is it plugged in?
People,
Can you hear me now?
bring it closer.
No,
Can you hear me now?
Doesn't seem like it's.
maybe you can
better.
share with.
Right, might you take Chris's microphone for a second, if Chris, yours working? Thank you.
So I think the worry is that we can't have a regulation where it's not allowed anywhere. So if the idea is to not allow it in any residential zones, except we don't allow homes in any other zones besides residential, then effectively we're not allowing it anywhere. So I don't think that withstands constitutional muster, but I'm not an expert in this yet, but I think the thought process of making it, if on the big picture, the board decides that the recommendation to the town board is we'd like to have a really restrictive code. On the whole, the balance is toward, after we define what the whys are for this, it slants toward we'd like to minimize the ability to have this type of permit. I think makes sense to find different ways to regulate it other than outright prohibition.
All right, because I know that like in a highway commercial, there are some residential properties. There's also residential and RP, right?
There's RP and CN,
Yep.
I believe.
Neighborhood commercial, that's right. Yep.
The homes in highway commercial are pre-existing non-conforming. And if you own an outright highway commercial property, residential homes are not allowed to be built on it
Yep.
from scratch.
Yeah, it would definitely be limited,
Yeah.
so I can understand.
And I heard you, I think I heard you clearly, Mr. Hess, and we could also look at this kind of like one residential zone at a time. There could be certain residential zones like, R1 that we would want to absolutely prohibit it.
Yeah, except, I
Right.
mean, we sort of had this conversation before, like equity-wise. I don't want to be shifting everything onto the R3 zone.
Right, agreed.
Yeah.
Understood, right? That's, I didn't mention R3. I just talked about one end of it, not the other end.
There are two, right?
But I got your point that it might be better done through some other form of regulation rather than a prohibition.
And there's something that I didn't see in here, and I know at times we've had a fair amount of it going on, which is where there's really a third-party rental. An employer will rent a number of units, sometimes apartments, but sometimes other dwellings. And for short-term employees or for employees who are moving but have not found permanent housing. And the employer is the renter. At least that's what I've been told.
Although in that particular case, wouldn't the rentals mostly be over 30 days?
I think Leslie's
no.
point is that they could change, even though you have one renter, they're essentially licensing
The
it to
occupant
different
can
people
change.
within that 30-day period to be there.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
Well-
Well, here's the good news, Leslie. I'm agreeing with you in concept. So I think what you're saying is that if you had a corporate, essentially long-term tenant, they could sub-license it to people who they had in town. Here's what I would say. I think there's lots of things we have to think about, but if we can get something that deals with most common situations, that would be a home run. And even if it means that we don't get to everything on the periphery.
I know we have a large number now of traveling medical personnel, and sometimes they take 3-month assignments, sometimes they take 1 month. I don't know how often they're the renter and how often the employer is. I don't have any current data on that, but I know it's happening.
Yeah,
Um,
I don't know how many codes would get down into that because I think that the point of the code is the time limit, right? So if it's less than 30 days, it's a short-term rental. If it's longer than 30 days, it's a long-term rental. If it's less than 30 days, you would need a permit and it'd be governed by all of these regulations. And if the permit goes to the employer and then they sublease it, I don't know that in our code matters too much because you're still having the license, like at that point, you're going like multiple
neighbors-
layers down.
But the impact on the neighbors is still there.
Right. But like the owner of the home is the one that's going to be licensed and responsible for how they maintain the property. So whether or not the renter is a medical company that pays for their nurse to be there or the nurse is renting directly themselves, I don't think that matters in a code regulation. Right? Because it's just who's ever paying for the house.
That's the dilemma though.
Yeah,
Because
Yeah.
you could have the occupants changing every 30 days or less.
Well,
Yeah, but then it would just be regulated like an Airbnb.
we also have to look at, is that the problem area we're trying to solve?
It's
too?
not.
And so,
Yeah.
I mean, when people are there, they're going to work every day. It is, we're
Yeah.
talking about places being rented on weekends for, parties
Yeah,
and
yeah.
things that are really disrupting the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good Leslie raised it. I think we could come back to it as, to Mr. Hess's point about it is something that sits within the periphery of our scope, right? So we can, I think, come back to it. But in the spirit of Laura going through the pages, and I know we took a little diversion to
Yeah.
set some fundamentals. I just want to, so 30, defining it as 30 consecutive nights, perfect for me. Or less, right? Yeah, less than 30 consecutive nights. Do we need to define that based on occupancy? Or in a similar discussion where we had, who holds the rental agreement? Are they one and the same?
Well, only the owner can apply for that application.
Or,
That
or,
permit.
okay, or is it in context of the owner?
Yes, if, are we saying the code would be written that the owner would be the applicant for a short-term rental? Maybe we make that clear.
Well, I think it is. And there, I think it talks about, because the owner could be an LLC or,
The owner,
yeah,
whatever the owner.
exactly,
the
whoever
owner
it is. Right?
And to Leslie's point, if it were a short-term rental in a corporate environment, the owner is the one that's applied for it and it's legitimate.
Okay, so let's pin that down. So this context of the definition of the renter is on the perspective of the owner who is doing the renting.
Yep.
Right? They get the,
Permit.
right?
Correct.
They get
Yes.
the permit. So I don't know if we need to call it out clearly in that definition.
Yeah, I mean.
We could come back to it.
In this definition is, like you said, it's
Yeah.
one person or whatever the maximum allowed. It doesn't make a difference. It's 30 days, less than 30-day rental. Whether it's one
Yep.
night, one person, or
Yep.
2 nights, 10 people, right?
So I think we're good. So next question I have is on the hosted short-term rental one. Right? The 184 days just came straight out of North Elba for the host.
That came straight out of North Elba. I do see that. I've seen similar numbers to that because it has to be more than half of a year
Yeah.
in order for it to be your primary residence. Yeah. 184 days is a little bit more than half a year, but it's not that much more than half.
No, it's like right
Yeah.
round number half.
Okay.
Well, you have to account for leap years. There's an extra day.
Yeah.
Do we in our code define an owner anywhere else? Forget short-term rentals. Do we? We don't. I don't think we define that.
An
should have the code up.
owner? I don't think we do define an owner.
Yeah.
They do make a distinction between occupants and guests. And guests aren't defined here, but again, a guest I think is a pretty standard, like if you looked it
Definition.
up in the Merriam-Webster.
Right. I mean, somebody who's not
People
paying you to
aren't
stay in
gonna-
their place.
Yeah. Probably not going to be problematic.
Yeah.
Okay, so then the bottom after this, so the definitions are specific to this code or be specific to a short-term rental definition code. And then they would just go in our regular definition section. They just fold right in. They'd just be listed alphabetical. Then then it would have its own section in the zoning code, and I haven't decided exactly what number it would be, so I haven't changed the section numbers. I don't know where it would fit yet. But then it would have its own section or article. And then the purpose, this is what I was talking to you guys about with my training. It splits the screen, which is very annoying. But so like the general purpose is to establish comprehensive permitting regulations to safeguard the public health, safety, and welfare by regulating and controlling the use, occupancy, oversight, and maintenance of short-term rentals. The town of Niskuna also recognizes that the historical nature of the community has been that of a small residential community of owner-occupied dwellings, and that extensive short-term rentals endanger the residential character of the community and may cause disruption to the peace, quiet, and enjoyment of neighboring homeowners. Accordingly, in order to respect the property rights and interests of all homeowners in the town of Niskuna, this local law seeks to achieve a balance between those who offer their homes as short-term rental properties and then those who choose not to do so. I think this is a little heavy on so I did, because I massaged it a little bit, because the town of North Elba, they recognize that short-term rentals are an important part of their economy. So they have a little bit of a balance there. And I, tried to take some of that out. But if I send the Word document out and you guys want to wordsmith
Yeah.
that a little bit.
I mean, I guess I can go on the record and say I wanted to at least honor the protocol of going page by page, but maybe I'll make the statement. So probably the most profound thing that came across to me from reading through this was the fact that how much we are not the town of Elba,
Yeah.
right? We are a residential, primarily community with the other kind of zones that allow for commercial neighborhood research, right? All
Yes.
the-
Although, if you go online to the town of North Elba, they have a very comprehensive document of their public comments, and they have a very comprehensive document of a study they did that looked at each individual section of their code and why it was adopted. And I was just reading through some of the comments, and some of the comments are very similar to what we've heard. Like
Yeah.
the partying and the disruption to the neighborhood. They're definitely struggling with similar issues.
Right.
Yeah.
But again, they also recognize that's a key part of their economy.
So they did get comments that if they were too strict, locals don't go to downtown and shop. And that was a couple of the comments that they heard a couple of times. So, and that was kind of the distinction in the training that I heard as well, right? That there's the bedroom communities like Niskuna, and then there's the seasonal communities like North Elba, and you have to know which one we are.
Mhm.
And we are a bedroom, not a seasonal.
Right.
So it makes it different. And, I think they said this. It's not like there's actually such a prevalence of Airbnb rentals in seasonal communities that they're not as obvious. They don't stick out as much. Whereas like in a bedroom community, you'll have much less.
Right, right.
But they're much more obvious because the communities are more tight knit.
Yeah. And so for the paragraph you just read, and I know I can't believe I'll use this combination of words in my life, but I don't think we can establish an equity between a owner of a property who's seeking to have that be their primary residence and enjoy what comes with that in a residential community, and the owner of a property in the same zone, same neighborhood, who seeks to actually make it into a business,
Right.
right? I
We-
don't think we can equate those.
Yeah, no, we can definitely change that. I think it's a little heavy on that too, but it's never a bad thing to, in your code, recognize the rights of all and then talk about how you're going to balance them.
Right, recognizing that to date, we have not infringed on anyone's right to do a long-term rental,
Right. Yeah.
right? Yeah.
I didn't change it very much. I took a couple of the seasonal things out there, but I think we should work on the why and have it be very specific to Niskayuna.
Okay. I had no comments on page 1.
Okay, and then so the next kind of big part of this code is that all short-term rentals are required to have permits. The permitting stuff was pretty simple, I thought. You can't, and some of this just makes it much easier for us to enforce when we get a complaint, right? So if we get a complaint and they don't have a permit, that's a very easy like stop work order. You can't have what you're doing. But we currently don't have that. So the permits are there. They're valid for a year, which is pretty normal for us. Everything we do is year, and everything we do requires a renewal application. So that's very similar to how we govern most long-term permits in the town of Niskayuna. It's non-transferable. So if a person buys the property and it's a new owner, they have to get their own permit. So they can only have one permit per property.
Yeah,
And-
I was going to ask you a question, that one, Lord, on number 4 about one dwelling. So if they had a residence that, say, had a permitted in-law apartment or a apartment over the garage, but they require 2 permits, is that what that's saying? They would have to get a permit for each dwelling? Is that what we're trying to say there?
No, this says that if you had possibly an accessory home care unit, you'd have to pick the one or the other to rent.
So you could only have one or the other.
Yeah,
One-
but
one
you
short
know,
term.
well, it wouldn't
Short-term
actually.
permit.
So it wouldn't actually apply to accessory home care units because those have to be for someone
Right.
that you're related to. Where that would possibly apply is pre-existing non-conforming properties that have more than one dwelling unit, and this code would say that they would only be allowed to rent one of the dwelling
So
units.
another example would be if we had a 2-family home somewhere in Niskayuna, they could only get one permit for one half of the home?
Yeah, and the only time we actually have 2-family homes, aside from multifamily residential, which is pretty limited in our code, is pre-existing non-conforming. Especially like down in Old Niskayuna, when you get closer to Union Street, there's a number of 2-family and 3-family homes on like Palmer and a couple of those other places that aren't allowed under code but have it. So,
But in those instances, just to confirm, it would only be one of the units that would be allowable for.
that's what that
For
says.
short term.
Correct, how
Yeah.
it's written. how it's
Yeah,
written.
that's how that's written. Lake Placid had exemptions after that. That's what I highlighted in yellow. So they specifically exempted some of their more commercial areas to allow more than one Airbnb permit when it got closer to their downtown. If they had multiple dwelling units on a single parcel, they allowed more than one Airbnb in very specific corridors.
I'm happy with one.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that, thanks.
Okay. So, and like we'll go through it, but again, like just be thinking about it and we can talk about changes we want to make, but then we can also, if you're reading it and you want to make comments and send it back, but this is just a good starting point. So violations are subject to the penalties that are in farther down in the chapter. That's just a normal part of the code. No, oops, man, good page. Whoops. No permit shall be issued or reissued unless it complies with, all the sections of code. And then I highlighted this because we have very few septic systems. But Kevin and I talked at the beginning, even though we have very few septic systems in the town of Niskuna, and there's a significant chunk of code in here about septic systems, I suppose if a home that was on a septic system ever wanted to be an Airbnb, if, we're looking at it, like for now, Kevin and I thought we should leave it in.
Yeah, because if you look further on, there's, the size of the septic system may limit their opportunity no matter how many bedrooms they have, depending on the design of the system. And obviously, we wouldn't want that. So that'd be another way to limit the occupants based on the capacity of the septic system. And we have about, I'd say, I don't know, 3%,
It's
somewhere in
very
there
small,
in this unit
yeah.
is on septic, and a couple of us here tonight are on septic. So,
I think
so I think it was good to keep that in.
the percentage on this board is not representative of the percentage of the town.
Laura, I have a quick question, and it's a tad off topic, but it's stinging
Yeah.
for me. Let's just use the Milton Keynes folks in that neighborhood. Let's say we get something through and it's codified, it's all done, however long that takes. And these folks that own the house are not paying attention or are simply ignoring it and decide that they're going to rent out their home for a weekend or whatever it is. Their neighbors call the police show up. What happens to the folks in that house?
They don't evict them.
It doesn't?
No,
So they
absolutely
don't
not.
have to, but they
Absolutely
don't,
not.
those people don't have to vacate?
No. But the owner would lose their license.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. We're not throwing people out in the street at midnight.
Right, no,
It
I
does
didn't
not
think so.
end well.
I didn't know
Yeah.
what way that would be
No,
handled.
but they may be required to cancel future reservations.
Yes,
if the
Yeah,
they
permit-
may be
They
required
lose
to
their
cancel
home.
future reservations. So if there's a call and there's a problem, I mean, if there's like police code violations, that's an entirely separate thing. But if it's just obviously a violation
Yeah.
of that this is a short-term rental that wasn't registered with the town of Niskayuna, then they'll just get a notice and order from the building inspector the
Got
next
it.
morning.
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked that, Nancy, because I think fundamentally, right, everything about this code and the permitting process and everything else must put 100% of the onus back on the owner, right, in all cases.
Yes.
Agreed, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Laura, the only other comment I had is it mentions enforcement officer several, and I guess that was from the old Elba, North Elba. So is, for us, that would be the code enforcement officer?
Yeah.
So I think we should add, the word code in front of enforcement officer.
Everywhere.
Yep,
Yeah.
which we have, what, three code enforcement people right now, or four?
We have 2.5.
2.5?
Yep.
Who's the young person? No, I'm just kidding.
Part-time,
He's part-time.
apparently.
We just got him. He's learning. So they mention a tax. We do not have taxes, and I actually think we can't levy taxes. But I did notice in the like the Airbnb best management practices, it's all about collect your tax. I don't think that we can collect any taxes, and I don't think that we're regulating for the sake of taxes.
Yeah, no.
So I would probably just
Yeah.
remove that unless anybody knows of anything. The permitting fees are actually relatively high, so I don't know of any
Correct.
other taxes.
I think we could tax. I don't know that we want to.
Yeah, I honestly don't know how to do that. I'm not sure that it belongs in a zoning code if you're going to tax them either.
If it's a business, it can be taxed.
Yeah.
Do we don't get into the amount of the permit in this anywhere, do we?
No, well, I think they mention it, but honestly, it's usually set by the town board. So I think I was just looking at I think their regulations like $1,000 maybe.
Yeah, there was 1,000 later on in one of the later
Is
chapters.
$1,000? Oh, is that aligned with our other permitting?
Well, actually, right here. No, that's much higher.
But our permits are also a percentage of the improvement. Like, so if we have a major
Totally
water,
depends.
right?
We
So
have
therefore
a
the-
whole different fee structure. If you're building a new house, it's by the square footage.
Right.
If you're doing an addition, it's by the value. If you're putting a roof, it's flat. It's a flat fee.
If it's short-term rental, it may be based on the potential income.
Like yeah, like a accessory home care unit, I think is a flat fee every year of $100, something like that. Yeah. This actually says right here, accompanied by payment of the annual permit fee in the amount to be set by resolution of the town board, which is the way that you want to do that. You don't want to have to open up your zoning code to change your fees.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pain in the butt because it takes so long to change. So,
Close public hearing and all that
yeah.
stuff.
so you just want the fees to be allowed to be amended regularly by the town board. So, and then this is what's required on the permit. A list of all the property owners of the short-term rental property with their names, addresses, telephone numbers. If it's owned by a company, all of the names, addresses, and phone numbers, emails of the partners, shareholders, principals. That's standard for a permit. They have to sign an affidavit that says that they'll comply with the following standards, which are written later in the code as well. So they're just saying that they're complying with the standards that are written actually later in the code. And they have to have a site plan drawn to scale that shows the parking, and then if it's not served by public sewer, the septic. And then if there's a private septic, there's a whole extra stuff they have to go through if they have a septic.
So Laura, whereabouts are you right now?
Page 3.
Number
No,
five.
sorry, page 4.
Okay, I had a comment back, I'm sorry, I was just.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Back on page 3, we talk about open flame sources, making sure that they have, fire extinguishers, carbon monoxide detectors.
Mhm.
You get down a little bit further, it says section 4, all fireplaces, fireplace inserts, other fuel burning heaters shall be vented and properly installed and flues cleaned within 12 months of the application of permit. I mean, if you got a gas fireplace, does anybody ever clean their flues for a gas fire? I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I think that's more of covering
The type.
it's just, yeah. I mean, and so
So it's a wood burning or, a pellet burning fireplace insert, not a gas insert.
Right.
When I used my fireplace a lot, I actually did have it cleaned.
So that's
Gas
the,
fireplace? I'm talking about gas here.
yeah.
Gas
I
fireplace?
had wood burning.
I'm talking about gas.
And, okay.
Because it says gas up above and then it says fireplace inserts. I just wanted to clarify that the
Gas
fire,
should have it too, though.
I don't know many people that clean their gas because usually it's pretty clean.
You bring up a good point though, and that is, are we kicking around the concept that if someone's going to apply for short-term rental, we're going to require inspections for that permit to be approved? Because owners, to the points that were made, we know when we use and don't use. So we don't use what we don't know, but a guest wouldn't know.
it might be a question for North Elbow to call. I think that it's my, like, reading through that code, it would be very cumbersome and unlikely for my building inspectors to really be, I mean, the only way you'd be able to do that, if you were really going to do that, is that they'd have to provide you with a certification that it was cleaned,
Which is
or they would have to
totally-
sign an affidavit that it was cleaned.
Which
That's
is,
not in this code.
okay.
I think my thought on why this may be in there is maybe some old lawsuit or something like that, where they're saying, okay, we go through the house at the very beginning, we see smoke detectors, we see things, everything looks safe. From that moment on, you are responsible for doing this. You know, because I think that the town in some ways takes on some liability for permitting an Airbnb.
Yeah.
And so I think that probably there's a section of code that says, you know, well, they're making them sign something that says, we saw that it was safe. You need to keep it safe. If it burns down, it's not because the town permitted it. It's because you didn't clean it every 12 months. That's my guess on why that is in that code. Probably not zoning related. It's probably actually more liability related.
Right, but Chris, I hear what you're saying, understanding the context of the code, but Chris is raising an important point, and we've encountered it already, right? I'm going back to Mr. Hess's statement about finding other ways of doing this than not, within prohibiting with the code.
Right.
This concept of enforcement, inspection, it's going to keep coming back up. Right?
It's a problem. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a heavy lift sometimes. But the way this code is written actually is like the kind of easier permitting stuff is up front. And then how it fits into the zoning is in the back of this code. So I highlighted that all in yellow. They change where this applies and decide what zonings it goes into in the back of the
Yep.
code. So this would be, if it was allowed, what are we doing here? It doesn't really say where it's allowed
Yep.
yet, if that makes sense. And maybe if we're looking at it, we want to shift it around so that where it's allowed comes first.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciated that when reading it. I know we're going to get to that point, and I know right now there's a premise here in terms of how it can work, right? If we are going to have it work
Right.
in what we're currently reading.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you guys, it would be like, I don't actually think it's the intent of this code, but it would be very challenging. I mean, if we only had 3, maybe not as challenging, but for my building inspectors to be trying to get people to maintain their
Just to clarify,
chimneys.
my suggestion wasn't that we police and monitor those inspections or that we're accountable for them happening. We're requiring that the applicant provide certification of those inspections prior to permit being granted. If we wanted to make it easier for folks to do this, I wouldn't bring it up. But since we may, as a bedroom community, which we all know, we've got a fireplace that we use all the time, and this other one we're not sure about in our own homes. If we're going to invite others or strangers in, maybe we require that additional burden on the owner to assure that they're all safe. But that we don't expect it. We just expect that we inspect that they have a certification before they get an approval. But I'm not asking the town to do it, just to be clear.
Okay, yeah, I understand that better. Yeah, so you would require certifications by a third party.
Just to clarify the difference there, I'm not sure that I'm not
No, that's
recommending it, just.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's why, it is cumbersome, and that's why the fee needs to be appropriate too, for any amount of work that the town has to pick up as a result of this.
And the concerns of the community.
Will there also be
Is your microphone on?
Turn your microphone on and pull forward.
Oh, it wasn't on. Will there be stipulations on what types of properties or what sections of your properties, meaning allowing for basements to be rented out? And if so, are there going to be inspections on like egress and safe exits, and that's going to be a whole section, or does that get lumped in with having the first inspection?
So living space in a basement has to be permitted by New York State. So if your home is built new, you have to submit the code to the town of Niskuna, and we check ingress and egress. And if you retrofit a home, you're required to get a building permit to make your basement into a living space, at which time it's checked for ingress and egress, and it has to comply with code. Do people finish their basements without getting a building permit? Absolutely. If we catch them, they have to fix it. So the code for short-term rentals does not have to require what is safe for a basement. That's governed by New York State. And if, for instance, a permit application came in and it was showing the rental space in the home and it showed it as a basement, and the building inspectors would check the permit and be like, you don't have a permit. Your basement is not permitted for occupancy. Then you have to come get a building permit to retrofit your basement now to be permitted for occupancy, or you have to remove everything from your basement and we do an inspection that you've converted it all back to storage.
And that would be upon us to do that one-time inspection.
We do that anyway. Like, we catch a fair amount of finished basements without building permit during closings. And
Yeah, but it's one thing if it's a single owner occupant. It's totally different if it's for rent on a short-term basis. The risk is higher to the occupants.
but we're not going to be licensing anything that doesn't have a building permit for it.
So what I'm saying is we are going to police the current status of the house. When they put a permit application, and we'll send someone out, we'll see the basement is not to code. We'll hold the permit and we'll give them a notice.
Okay, it's just semantics here, but it's entirely separate from a short-term rental code. If my building inspector finds in any way, shape, or form that a building has been finished without a building permit, then everything else stops, and they have to get a building permit to finish their basement. You would never be able to get a short-term rental permit until you had closed out and completed a building permit that allowed the basement to be finished. Then you could say, okay, now my basement's finished. Now consider my short-term rental occupation. They're going to be separate always.
Fair. My question is, if we get an application for short-term, are we sending someone out there?
I mean, maybe I'm not understanding what you're saying. If we get an application that says that there's a basement with somebody living it and we don't have a permit for a basement, they automatically.
Yeah, there's a section where they have to show a site plan.
Yeah, they have to
the application.
identify
Yeah,
if
they have to
identify
show, they have
basement,
to
is
show
the
a cache.
basement
Yeah.
compliant or not? And if they can pull records or do an inspection. But, it's up to the applicant
Yeah.
to state how many bedrooms and where the
So-
people are going to be renting.
We don't even have to go there because
They submitted
it
wrong.
doesn't show on the town's records that they have a CO for a basement,
For a basement.
and they don't get to count that as livable space
Yeah.
for this application.
Yeah, no inspections needed. Like, boom, all of a sudden you gotta talk to the building inspector and
So
you
forget about everything we just talked about. When we get an application for a short-term rental, do we send someone out there to look at the smoke detectors or look at anything? Do we do any site inspection predicated on an application for
I
short-term
mean,
rental?
I think this code does say at the beginning, there's a site inspection.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not that you would know the answer to that, but that's my question is, do we envision
But
having to take on that burden?
the building inspectors under state law are required to go and look at what they're permitting. If they see something that isn't up to code, they're certainly allowed to say something. But if, for instance, they were doing a site inspection and they're checking for smoke alarms and they're on the first and second floors, that's what they're going to look for. They're not necessarily allowed to be like, show me your basement, because if the building permit, if the application for a short-term rental doesn't include a basement, they're not going to tell somebody when they go into their house to open up their doors and show them the basement. They can't do that. It's all based on what is before them and what they're doing at the time. Does that make sense?
It does, except that if we're going to create a permit for short-term rentals, that permitting, we have to define it. And maybe that definition is you have to open up the whole building for
I
an
don't-
inspection.
I don't think you can do that.
Okay.
That's up to
Because
Rob.
my concern is simply that we have a very old community and we have a lot of legacy homes. And I think there'd be a high potential of a lawsuit, potentially, for us missing the fact that the basement's not livable space with no egress, but it looks very much like a livable space. And I'm trying to avert that. In new builds and new constructions, that's rare because usually the forms come with an egress and everything's different. But in our neighborhood, I've walked into a lot of basements that you can't get out of. But you feel like it's a living room, but you just can't get out of it.
So that, my question, oh, sorry.
So there's going to be a part the town can control and a part we can't. So when there's a permitting process that says, if this is the route that we end up going, that you can have an Airbnb and you have 3 bedrooms, so you can have those 3 bedrooms with 6 people plus 2, was it 8 or however the code works, or 10. That doesn't mean you can have any of those people in the basement. So if it, of course, anything can be subject to litigation. That's the nature of litigation, right? You can get sued for anything. But if you revert back to the sketch plan that was submitted when we granted a permit to have Airbnb, and we have appropriate occupancy based on the bedrooms that we see on the permit, if people end up in the basement, the town has a great defense.
And the reason I'm pushing back we can't use this as a tool to find unpermitted
Yeah.
basements. Like
I'm not
Yeah.
saying, I'm trying to prevent the situation.
it's always good to find them because they're probably one of the most dangerous things that people don't get building permits for. But you couldn't use a zoning code tool to get into people's basements. like
Yeah,
that.
and that's not my motivation, right? If, I want to make sure I clarify this publicly. If it's your home and you're using it as your home and you do things like you had mentioned, things get done, grandfathered, missed, whatever, that's one thing. But when you're inviting the public to come in to the home, I think you need to take extra precaution to be sure it's super safe. That's all. And I think you point out the sketch plan will make it clear for us at least what their intended use is and that they should lock, areas that are not allowed or note areas that are not allowed by their occupants. That's
Right.
fair.
I mean, just for the record though, if they have finished the basement and it doesn't actually matter. Like if they've finished it, it's unsafe for them as well. At all points in time, they should come get a building permit for a finished basement because
True.
everybody probably knows, but if you have a fire and you only have one exit, it's a death zone. So you have to have 2. And it's not that hard. You can put in like window wells or anything, but you've got to have 2 exits in your basement.
I think to that point though, maybe making that notice that you're not to be in this part of the house is something that may be worthwhile requesting, because if I go into someone's house, I'm assuming that it's safe, right? I make that assumption as a consumer or someone coming onto the property that this property is safe, and then maybe it has been inspected, especially if I'm just not knowledgeable about those things. So if I see that I have access and I don't think about those things, I think, requiring,
Even more so since we're permitting it.
yeah.
I totally think that your hearts are in the 100% the right
Yeah,
place,
yeah.
but I don't think that the zoning code does that. It's a building code issue,
Oh,
and
I'm-
we're in
I'm
the zoning
saying
code.
As the owner, did I say this is where, like a notice, like part of it says like a welcome and rules of the neighborhood?
Mhm.
In that, it should say you have, rented this space, don't have access to any other spaces. I'm not talking about like going in and looking at unpermitted spaces.
I guess it's possible. I think this code requires that, the rules of Lake Placid be posted in a home or something like that. I think it's asking a lot of people to read the rules that are posted in an Airbnb house, which most people don't do. But some people might. I think it certainly, we could add it in there. I think it'd be a good note, but the better thing to do, I think, which we try to do all the time, is to constantly be pushing the education for people about finishing their basements separately and apart from a zoning code change, because that issue is going to exist for short-term rentals. It exists when homes change over, and I can't even tell you how many times people say, I didn't finish my basement, I bought it this way.
Yeah, and plus, Laura, if you start doing, picking out basements, what about, you got swimming pools, is gate self-closing? You got a
Fences around
pond,
the
is it
swimming
2
pool.
feet deep? It goes on and on. All those things are covered in New York State Building
Yes.
Code.
Yeah.
And I just had one more. The question on the violation. If someone is a problem owner,
Mhm.
how many violations would it take for their permit to be revoked? And is it like revoked in perpetuity, like you can never have another permit, or is it just, I'm going to apply the next year?
I have to go back and look at that, because that's we'll get there, but that's in the enforcement section. And at least my understanding is, well, one, we'll get there. It wanted to create a board, which Kevin and I discussed. I don't think we need a separate Airbnb board. That's something for a seasonal town, not a bedroom community. But it may just, it may depend on whoever listens to that case, like how severe the violation was. They would be the ones to decide whether it would be like one-time violation would be severe enough that you could just lose your permit, or, you get a warning for something.
So it would be the discretion of whoever's there at the time.
Well, this code provides, so this code provides for a board that listens to complaints about,
Oh, okay.
It
yeah,
comes up
an
in
Airbnb.
A few
yeah.
pages from now.
But I don't think we need to create another board. I think we can use one of our existing boards, but.
All right, so we're on page 5 still?
4.
4. I'm ahead of you. I had no other comments on 4.
Yeah, okay. So it also requires, as part of the permit, that there's a contact person within, 60 minutes distance by car, available 24 hours per day, 7 days a week. Which actually we require that sort of for the vacant homes properties that we make them register. So upon filing the application, you have to pay the fee. We have 30 days to review the application. I went back and forth on that. We don't have that many places in our code where we have in planning board we do, but the zoning enforcement office code usually takes us 14 days to look at stuff, but it can be different. It can be longer depending on how many permit applications we have. But I understand why they have a timeline for when the application goes back out, because it's a balance of rights again there. So yeah, this is, I guess, kind of getting to your question. The code enforcement officer has the right to inspect short-term rental property to ensure compliance with this section. But they have to get express consent of the property owner for such limited inspection purposes. And this is pretty normal language for permit issuance, that the enforcement officer can impose any reasonable conditions and restrictions directly related to the use of the property, as long as they're consistent with the code. So that's sort of issuing a building permit with conditions, which we do fairly regularly. And it can be denied if it's incomplete, if it's not paid for, if they've had their permit revoked within the previous year, if the application is not in compliance, well, if the property is not in compliance with the zoning code, if the site plan isn't good, which is sort of like an incomplete, if the septic system can't handle it, and if they do not grant the building inspector access to an inspection prior to the issuance of a permit. And then again, so the permits are issued and they state the following. They have the names of the owners, they have the person that's available within 60 minutes. The permit itself will state the maximum occupancy of the rental and the vehicle limits for the short-term parking unit, the identification number and location of the parking spaces, a statement that littering is illegal, a statement that all fires must be attended and any outdoor fire located within the limits of town of Niskuna must be extinguished no later than 9:30 p.m.
Laura just had a question on that one. Is that the standard now?
Yeah, so that's why that's highlighted. I have to cross-reference that to our open burning chapter because I'm not sure what our open burning chapter says.
Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know about that. That's why I said,
yeah.
not that I do it anyway.
Uh,
No, I don't, but I'm just,
Well, probably that's partially, to help with outdoor noise. I have to check our open burning chapter, but, if you limit the fires to have to go out at 9:30 p.m., that's a hard concrete enforcement thing, right? Because they could go out there at 10, and if there's a fire burning, it's like, okay, put out your
Right.
fire, and then it goes inside.
yeah, I just didn't know if it was consistent.
I don't know
or
if it's consistent
with the-
either. I have to go and check that
Whether we're
too.
singling out the short-term rentals over regular residents for
Yeah,
fire.
we'll have to check for,
And I'm okay.
and reference it, yeah.
And I know the noise ordinance, so that's basically what we already have, right? So we're good there.
Yeah, noise ordinances exist. They're not super great to enforce, but they are
Hard to
there.
enforce. Yeah.
I got a question on the outdoor fire. That doesn't include barbecues, does it?
Oh, the open burning?
Yeah.
In our code? I don't think so because it's called open burning. I think that means it has to be open to the sky. But you can read it. I think it's like
Yeah, I'm not sure how.
it was.
That's-
It was adopted in the time that I've been a planner, but I think early on, so maybe like 7 or 8 years ago when I came here, I remember it being adopted. I don't know that we need a statement that prohibits fireworks, but I don't know that it hurts anything.
I think the thing there, Laura, I think all counties are different, whether they have improved. I'm not sure. I don't do it, so I don't know what Schenectady County rules are.
Schenectady does not allow them.
And
Doesn't even allow
They don't allow
sparklers.
They used to sell them in shops.
We're the nanny county,
They-
of this nanny state.
So fireworks is an interesting beast. They did. So Schenectady allowed them for, I believe, 2 years, but Schenectady had so many injuries that they banned them. New York State does allow you to opt in and out of fireworks at any time. Schenectady initially opted in when everybody was doing it and then opted out.
But there were limits on what fireworks. I mean, they were not major fireworks.
That is true. I think in New York, you can still only have the fountain ones and not the ones that shoot off. But Schenectady doesn't even let you have those.
They don't even let you have sparklers.
They don't even well, I don't know all the rules.
Sparklers are illegal in Schenectady County.
Yeah.
so basically the statement is whatever the county allows, we allow, right? If they do allow anything.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that should reference the county, honestly,
That's
although I think that makes it a little hard for people reading the code because then they have to go to the county.
Yeah.
But if you say fireworks are prohibited and then the county changes it and you have to go back and open
Yeah,
up your
yep.
zoning code again, which is a pain. We already talked about that.
Okay.
expiration date, and a statement that the short-term rental permit may be revoked for violations. The permits have to be displayed on the house. Prior to any renters taking occupancy, a hard copy of the short-term rental permit shall be prominently displayed within the home. That kind of gets to what you're saying. So you're right, like maybe on that, it can also talk about safe areas of the home. So, oh, I didn't catch this, North Elba.
Yeah.
The town of North Elba publishes updated quarterly all the permitted short-term rentals.
And is that the intent, that Ms. Skinner would do that?
I would think so. I mean, although we're not super great at keeping our website up, I do think it may be helpful for the public to see a list of the licensed
I
short-term
mean,
rentals.
effectively though, Laura, that's a link to a couple of websites for Airbnb, VRBO,
Well, then they
et
have to
cetera.
search.
Oh no,
so,
I think
right.
they actually. I
Right.
think it'd be more like a list of like
permits
planning board
issued.
members for
Yeah.
where
Well,
you'd have the address and then you'd have the expiration date. Oh, I guess they
Yeah.
all have the same expiration date, but
Yeah, that's okay. I mean,
I think that's better, yeah. And then later, yep, so just, you strike North Elba there, of course, you got that, so.
yeah. And then if they get amended permit, they have to repost their amended permit, and they're supposed to provide a packet of information with good neighbor guidelines. So, and then these are the standards for
Just, Laura,
occupancy.
I
Oh.
highlighted good neighbor guidelines. Is that something now that we have, or North Elba has, or, short-term rental agencies have?
I don't know. I don't know about that one. I wonder if that's something that North Elba makes. I'll see what I can find out.
Yeah, I
on
mean,
that.
if it's, if it's like a flyer that just says, think of your neighbors and, or if it's all things that are included in the proposed short-term rental policy procedure, then I guess you don't, it's just a copy of that,
Mhm.
Or maybe they're extracted so that, it's just, summarized, so, because there's a lot here, the expectations.
That might be a nice thing to have posted on the website for all residents too.
Yeah.
Yeah, then you wouldn't need to provide the packet, just would have the link in the, whatever to it.
And we had some wonderful neighbors and some who decidedly weren't.
Yeah. So this is kind of the meats and bones of the occupancy requirements. Again, this code kind of lays out the permit, then the formulas, and then the zones. It's kind of a long unfolding code, but so this one was written multiple times for the town and for the village. So I tried to condense it into one, but it, so it's 2 times the number of bedrooms that are in compliance with the New York State Building Code. And for the purposes of allowing what is a bedroom or is not a bedroom, they use the assessment records. Plus 2 additional occupants. So 2-bedroom unit would be allowed to have 4 occupants plus 2, so 6 maximum. A 4-bedroom unit would be allowed 8 occupants plus 2, which would be 10, and 6-bedroom unit would be 12 occupants plus 2, which would be 14. Studio apartments has a different formula based on square footage of space, and then the maximum capacity of the septic system is set by the septic system.
Or if there was a owner occupied short-term rental, would that person be in addition to the numbers, the formula here, or would that be inclusive? So if you had a family or one person living there, we would encourage that, as like you're saying.
Yeah, I feel like it could be a little bit of a gray area, but the definition of occupant, I think they do have that in here.
So it would
Any
include, it would
persons
include
located on
them
the
then.
short-term rental property between the hours of, yeah, so
Yeah,
I think it
okay.
would include
It would
them.
include them. Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I don't actually know why they have children in parentheses. As far as I know, children are always included as persons, but I left that in there too. Where were we?
Because some people think you can put the kid on the floor in a sleeping bag and not count the kid.
maybe that's why they specifically called it out.
Yeah. So there are a
Um,
few people like that.
And then, so they have another sentence that says the maximum number of people allowed for a short-term rental from 6 a.m. through 10 p.m. shall be no more than twice the number of overnight occupants. That's where I was saying they sort of like distinguish between like guests and then the occupants. So that essentially allows them to have more people there before nighttime. Fine with just completely taking that out.
What if they wanted to have a party for part of that time? Could they have more people?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That sentence allows you to have double the amount of people that would be allowed prior to 10 p.m. But then essentially they'd all have to go home at 10 p.m. And then the people who rent the house
So
are the only people who are allowed there between 10 p.m. and
that's a tough one because like if you talk about the 6-bedroom unit, 12 occupants, right, plus 2 additional. So you're talking 14 people. And then if you come down here and then you start talking that they could have twice as many, so it'd be 28 people
in the house at
You
any
know,
given time.
at any given time.
Yeah,
So
that's
it's-
why I
so
put
it's
it in
party still
yellow.
all day long is a problem there. There's a prior, so that's a tough one. But if the required off-street parking, isn't sufficient, then they shouldn't have that many people. They can't, it isn't a right to have that many if you can't park. All the vehicles got to be parked in the driveway, right? When you get to the next section.
Right.
So I don't know if that would police the previous section or not,
Except the guests could be taking Ubers in or something.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there may be a reason that they have that in there is because it may be good to put it in there in case of a violation, for instance, like if they show up and there's like 50 people. But that to me would allow a lot of extra people, I can't think of a reason why a home in Niskuna would need to be rented to have 28 people short term, right?
So maybe the answer is to change the number by keeping it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because that way
I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
it's not
Again-
like you completely remove it, but it should be like maybe way less.
Again, to reiterate, right? For me, this exercise is really with the assumption that we could do this. These are the kind of things it would entail.
Exactly.
I think once we get to the zoning section, we'll have an interesting discussion.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
These are things to think about with the permit because I mean,
Yep.
theoretically, even if you just let the permit happen in some zones, which we can
Yeah, and I think
need
one
to
of
have
the
a reasonable permit. Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the things it's showing is that if we were to allow this in certain zones, it's fairly complex.
Yeah. I don't think there's an uncomplex one.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it would change a lot of the workflows. It would change a lot of the responsibilities, et cetera, especially for the planning department.
If we had a lot of them.
There's not gonna be a lot of.
Right now, there's not. a lot
Well,
of them.
I mean, I see later on they're going to get to, some fairly ridiculous numbers here for North Elba in terms of what their minimums and maximums
Yeah,
are.
they have, right, yeah.
Yeah.
So then the off-street parking, the number of vehicles is limited to 1 vehicle per bedroom. They have to demonstrate that they have off-street parking meeting the standards of this local law. Spaces within a home garage do not count. And parking space shall have a minimum of 180 square feet in a rectangular configuration of at least 9 feet by 20 feet. So they have the bigger parking spaces that Leslie likes. And tenants and guests shall park in the off-street parking spaces required by the section and shall not park on any part of the lawn or on public or private street. I know that was a concern we heard. I do have a little bit of a concern of enforcement, but I think probably it should still be in there.
Yep.
A house number visible from the road, garbage picked up weekly, no campers allowed, weddings, corporate events, and commercial functions are not allowed at short-term rentals. All of that I think makes complete and utter sense. Online listings and advertisements for the short-term rental have to conform to what's allowed. The allowable number of vehicles shall be clearly and prominently displayed on all online listings or advertising for the short-term rentals. This has, another link to the Good Neighbors Guide. Owners shall have a short-term rental agreement with each renter, which Oh, okay. So they can actually terminate their permit with the renter if they need to. One functioning smoke detector, exterior doors shall be operational, electric systems shall be serviceable. This is what they were actually, remember I told you it was later in the code, this is what they're signing that they're doing. Fireplaces have to be cleaned every 12 months. And, oops, each bedroom shall be in compliance with the New York State Building Code. So I highlighted, did anybody have any more questions on that one?
I just had one question. When it comes to like good neighbor policies, I would just say that we need to be mindful because I don't think we have the personnel to enforce it. But like when we talk about occupancy, keeping it low, but also just from personal experience, trash is an issue because
That comes up a lot in their code.
because
Yeah.
well, they're there to have parties and it's excessive trash. And then if your trash pick up a lot of Niskayunas like a Tuesday and it just sits on the side of the house and it's not a typical like, 4-person family kind of trash. It's a lot of people and it's unsightly and it becomes an issue. So that's also something to take into account.
So like all trash must be containered at all times.
Yeah, like they have to either keep it inside until trash day. I don't know. It's just like from experience, it just is really unsightly.
I think they have that though in the
Yeah,
in the
it's,
prior.
yep.
It has to be in containers.
In D, yeah, it says, tight fitting covers all times, prevent leakage, spilling odors, placed where they are not clearly visible from the street or road except when waiting pickup.
Which is actually more stringent than the residents have, so
Yep.
Yes.
I'm
We-
comfortable with that.
Okay. So, there's another North Elba. I was doing a search and find, but still.
Yeah. It's there's a few of them, but that's okay.
So this is where I highlighted it because this is where they kind of break things out into districts and corridors. And I'm still not quite sure what the difference is between like the lodging short-term rental and then the other things. I mean, my thought is that we can just completely get rid of the lodging short-term rental and then just have the unhosted and the hosted. But I read it a couple times and decided to leave it in there
So-
until like
It kind of helped me think through. They're not separating zoning or segregating zonings, but are they using geographies or neighborhoods
Yep.
to restrict where and where not short-term rentals would be permitted? Is that what they're kind of doing there?
Well, so the only thing that I found weird about the lodging short-term rental is it just shows up here, but it seems to be more related directly to Whiteface.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And I think it really is meant to cover for the seasonal,
Yeah, I think so
Yep.
too.
because you probably don't go there too much in the summer. You go there ski season.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key words for me there was, and it says it elsewhere to refer to it. They start off in A1 talking about a planned development district, which is the Whiteface Planned Development District.
Yeah.
And then
I
they
think
refer
that
to-
may be a carve out for something.
Yeah, and then they
specific.
refer to that planned district again
Yeah.
on
in
the
a-
next page.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
do.
so
And it doesn't apply to us. So.
Well, and the
Mhm.
whole military road corridor and the Gateway Corridor District, I mean, I think maybe those are just very much commercial seasonal areas where
Yeah.
there's a lot of hotels and stuff.
Yep. I'm with you, Laura.
yeah, like if you look at B, I'm sorry to jump ahead, like on page 9, right? I mean, that's when it gets closer to us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
agreed. So this is where they do unhosted and then hosted, and this is where they limit the where you can have the unhosted and the hosted to specific zoning districts.
Right, but again, they're still talking about those planning districts, right?
Well,
A, 2 and 3 are still in the context of the planning districts.
maybe. I mean, I
Yeah.
think their zoning maybe is like quite a bit different than us, but like I see rural countryside district. I mean, maybe that's a zoning.
It would be nice, Laura, to get a zoning map.
Yeah, we should look at it.
Yeah, but it's-
for them.
So,
And then they have hosted.
Yeah.
And hosted are permitted in all of their districts. And then, but the hosted ones can only be rented for a minimum of 40, wait. I thought that,
Yeah, I think that you're looking at 3B, right? I think the intent of that is to ensure that they actually do.
so I read that wrong the first time I was looking at it. I thought the hosted ones were allowed everywhere, but they could only rent for 14 days total.
Yeah.
It's actually a minimum of 14
It's a
days.
minimum, yeah.
And I don't know why we would do that.
Well, so I actually think the way I originally read it would be better if it was a hosted short-term rental. Maybe you can only rent them for a total of like 30 days or something like that total.
Yeah, we can, yeah, I mean, here they're setting a lower limit because it seems like
Allow them everywhere
yeah.
because they're in the house with
They want-
them.
yeah.
I would be more inclined to go for a lower limit for the unhosted ones. Because if you've got a property owner on site, then you've got more control over the situation than
Yeah.
an unhosted.
Well, so, or like the unhosted ones, like you say, like those ones are the ones that are more considered a business and it's much more strictly like not allowed in every zone. Like you can only have them in maybe some of the more commercial zones because people are buying that house to rent it. Whereas like the hosted ones, if you're living there for most of the year and maybe you're just renting them like when the Belmont's coming or like whatever, you can rent them for like, a week or two, but most of the time you're there.
Yeah.
And then in that case, all your neighbors, they can be in any zoning district, but you have a limited number of days that you could rent them to make money.
I'm far more concerned about the unhosted.
Yeah. So this is all in yellow because this is really
the
like the
sticky
meat,
part.
right? I mean,
Mhm.
we could like tweak a little bit of the permitting and stuff, but generally speaking, that's kind of standard and we can just make sure that it works for whatever. But like, this is where you really get into like, okay, I mean, do you want to regulate hosted and unhosted? Do you want to limit the zoning districts for one type or the other? And then that's, I mean, they have it written differently. And I agree with Clark, like it would be really interesting to get a zoning map to see exactly how they're doing that. But on the other hand, they're seasonal and we're bedrooms.
Right. So I mean, I know we're all going through this and it was necessary to go through that again to understand the complexity, but going back to now that we're in the zoning section, right? We're permitted section. I'm going back to Mr. Hess's statement. So a proposition, right? Hosted or unhosted, we prohibit it in R1, R2, R3 and allow it in RP and RR.
For the unhosted.
For Niskayuna. But it doesn't matter.
Oh, it
Short-term
doesn't
rental. Let's not zoom into.
So
Hosted
don't
versus
even have the
unhosted.
distinction between the hosted?
Yeah, because I'm saying come back, if we still have 2 residential districts that are available for it to happen. So we're not prohibiting it everywhere by the fact that we only have R1, R2, R3 prohibited. RP and RR are rated residential districts.
So I've done some research on this already, and there's actually not as much case law on this as I had hoped. It's sort of a new issue.
Yep.
So my sense is the information that you want from me is something I can't give you yet, which is to what extent can we exclude it by zone totally? And my sense is you'd have to make a connection between why it would be okay in R3 but not R1, right? Is it because the places are closer together? Is it because the
Yeah, and I'm not even saying, so I would treat R1, R2, R3 as the same.
Yeah.
And I would distinguish it from RP and RR.
What you're saying is because we're a
Or
bedroom, because
No,
we're a
that's
bed-
the end. We have an RP and we have an RR in our zone, in our code. A residential professional and a rural residential.
Okay, and okay, just to tease that out a little bit though, because the rural residential, generally speaking, is supposed to be for large parcels. So theoretically, the larger parcel might mitigate some of the impacts, but most of the rural residential, or at least half of it, was pre-existing before they put the rural residential zoning over it. So they're not as big of a parcel as you would think.
Agreed. I think what I'm trying to go after here is we don't want a code that is biased that will block this.
Right.
And I'm saying that we have the opportunity in those two
Yeah.
districts to allow it.
Well, I think Laura, also another way to say it is Laura's saying that RR is the same as R2 or R3.
Can be.
I mean-
There's places
I mean, there's
where
a lot
RR
of the
is big,
acre,
but-
a lot of lots, especially over Middle Street over there, they're small.
However, our code does distinguish them.
They do not distinguish them. Yeah.
They do not.
But
No.
and this is getting to Rob's why, right? So if
Okay.
the why, and maybe to me, then you almost do want to distinguish between the hosted and the unhosted. Like if we say unhosted is commercial, then I think you could say then it belongs more in the residential commercial zoning. I don't think RR though is a residential commercial zoning,
It wasn't intended to be.
right? So
Yeah, I think hosted and unhosted is a second pass. I think,
Right.
maybe we see if we can get to an understanding around short-term permitted versus not short-term. Then for short-term permitted, we
yeah,
can get to
because if you
hosted
don't make
versus
that
unhosted.
distinguishment, and then there's people who are hosting, but you're still calling that commercial. I don't know. It just, yeah.
But so not, I mean, look, I'm just going by what's in our zone, right? In our zoning code, there's an RR and there's an RP. That's different from CN, right?
There's-
That's different from R1, R2, and R3.
Well, our code actually builds R1 off of RR. So if you look at our code, RR comes first. That's the first residential zoning. R1 then references RR as having most of those uses included, and then a little bit less. I'm just saying, I think that if you were to pull the 4 truly residential zones out of our code, my opinion, RR, R1, R2, and R3 are the ones that are intended to be single family,
Correct.
whereas RP and CN and maybe trying to think of another one we have.
Okay, so then, all right, so,
But RP was.
so they're unallowed in RR.
It was a late addition, and there aren't that many
and
homes
it
in the
went
RP.
In with some opposition
Yeah.
from the residential.
I mean,
owners.
first of all, go back to Rob's statement, right? When we look at this town of Elba Code at tail end, right? They talk about a planning district. They do talk about different districts, right? They're, page 9, top of it, right? They're rural countryside, your North Lake residential district. So district is equivalent of a, we can
I
view that
think
as
that's a-
equivalent of a zone, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it looks like there's a basis for doing it by zone. And I think, again, to the point you made, is that there should be certain zones in the town of Niskuna where this is allowed, hosted or unhosted to be determined later. But I think we should have some zones where it's not allowed. And it's those zones where we have that quote unquote bedroom community expectation.
Yeah, and the only thing I think, which I really like coming back to the hosted versus unhosted, is it's less of a taking if you allow hosted kind of everywhere in the town, but make it very limited. And then you're really targeting in on the people who are, I don't know what it's called, like vulturing in on the properties to get them to, not live there and not be a part of the community, but just make money off the homes. And then you really confine those to the commercial. But if you do allow a small amount of the hosted ones, it sort of gets to Leslie's thing where if you needed to rent a bedroom and you're living in the home.
Well, but that would not be a short term.
It wouldn't be a short term.
Oh,
It'd
but
be
it
a long
wouldn't
term.
be a short
Yeah. So in all honesty, Laura, I mean, and look,
Yeah,
we're
that's
having an
right.
open discussion, brainstorming, so that's fine, right? The world sees it. I'm kind of viewing the hosted versus unhosted kind of as a restriction for us to actually activate that option. I think I would look at it as kind of like a last resort,
Of separating out the two.
right? Yeah, I think the short-term rental definition versus long-term rental definition, for me at least, I see it as a starting point.
I like the idea of separating them out, and I'm frankly far more comfortable with the hosted ones. Some of the horror stories I've been reading are not on the part of the renter, they're on the part of the property owner who rents it out and comes home and discovers a god-awful mess. They've discovered property damage, heaps of garbage, violation of every rule they thought they had in place. And sometimes it's very costly to get everything back to normal. So I'm far more comfortable with hosted arrangements than unhosted.
Right, but it
You've got
still begs the
somebody on
question though,
site,
where, right?
You're not gonna get that far.
Yeah, it still begs the question, where would we even consider those, right?
Your comments?
I do think it's important to kind of to delineate because I think a hosted and unhosted has a different purpose. It's one, we have a lot of people that go to Florida or may leave for the winter. Maybe they want to make extra money. Maybe they have fixed income. Where there are people that are specifically running. It's a small business. They're not invested in the town. They are just coming because this is a property that can make them money. And I think your intention behind it is different. So if you just allow this blanket kind of policy for everyone, I think it leaves it open for people to abuse it. So I think it is important to delineate like the intention behind it.
So if I were to combine the two comments, let's say we start with deciding hosted versus non-hosted. And then from there, what areas do we permit non-hosted and which areas do we permit hosted, which is what you were getting at.
Yeah, so just to be fair, I was one level before that.
No, I know.
I'm
but
saying which areas do we permit short-term
I
rentals?
get that, but if we
and which
did,
areas
if
do
we
we not
if we
permit?
took that as the hierarchy, the peak, and then layered yours on, how would that change yours?
Yeah, so I think the hierarchy, so for me, the hierarchy is short-term rental versus not, and then under short-term rental, hosted versus not. But I think in that order.
Yeah. But the geographies might be different for the hosted
Yeah,
versus the
no, agreed,
non-hosted. Okay.
agreed, yeah.
Well, and we always had the capability of limiting how many permits we would.
Yeah, I mean, they do that.
Yeah. I definitely
I
think we
like that a
can,
lot.
I think that's a layer down below that limits it. I mean, so for example, let's say this board as a collective felt that counter to the idea I raised, right? This board felt that no, maybe in one of the R districts, we need to permit this. Well, then we move to the hosted versus unhosted criteria, right?
So I was going to ask the council, can you repeat why it's in the interest of municipality to not restrict it completely?
If you restrict it completely, it's a losing side of an argument in front of court.
Right.
So even if you like the idea, you're just pushing that issue down until you lose at some point in court.
Someone's going to fight you.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the things that have come up in conversation tonight that are ways to limit some of this stuff, but I did want to comment on one thing that was said which was limiting number of permits. While I like the idea of okay, it doesn't help the people here tonight, right? Even if we have 3 permits, it could be the 3 that are or the ones that are
Yeah.
a problem. So, but these are all good ideas, right? So we've got to figure out what's going to work. That's going to tailor fit what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and I guess Rob, from my perspective, and I think here's where the rubber needs to hit the road from the legal study perspective, right? To the point that Chris just asked you about, and we've discussed a few times, is it sufficient that there's at least one zone in which short-term rentals is permitted?
In my sense, I'm shooting from the cuff,
Yeah.
but from the hip, but to my mind, it's actually analogous to adult uses.
Yep.
Which we allow only like in industrial zones.
Yep. That's actually, so I was
So
a little bit shy to say it, but that was actually the analogy I was using in my mind from
yeah,
going
no,
through the
that's
code.
fine. We're talking about constitutional issues, not
Yeah.
whether it's not. My job is different than your job, right? You're going to make a political judgment about what we should do that's good for our people, and I'm trying to make a decision on
The
what
legal
can we
one.
defend if it gets challenged.
Yeah. And actually, I think our thing is more legal too, right? We had to make sure that we're not in a untenable.
Right, you're being smart that you're not trying
Yeah.
to.
So that's
Yeah.
so my thing is that does at least one zone that permits it satisfy?
Yeah. So let's continue this conversation as long as you don't want. But before we go much deeper in this, I need to know what legal issues you need clarity on, so that I can just answer them, or I can tell you that there's no case law on it, or maybe it'll be the town attorney or someone else in her office who gets you that information. But clearly, that's part of what we need to do to figure this out.
Yeah. So I looked over Laura's question. So on that point, right, I looked over those questions you have as a last page, and I guess I'd like to make clear the question I just asked.
Yeah.
Right. in terms of in terms of our legal liability now or in the future, being able to be sued or whatever else it is that's going to happen. If we are always able to say, hey, we've permitted this in one zone that's got a residential label attached to it, does that satisfy the requirement of saying, hey, you know what? It's not prohibited in the
Or does
town.
it mitigate the lawsuits that would
Yeah.
likely?
Yeah.
Rob can look into that. But the distinction that I'm making, and I'm not trying to be annoying about it, is that if you really go at the commercialer ones that way, but you allow the kind of lesser impact ones to exist throughout, I think that makes your code much stronger and would hold up, because you're really saying, like, if you were just say all short-term rentals can only be in RP, there may only be, like, in all of the 8,000 homes that we have in Niskuna, like 15 homes in RP. So that may be strong enough, but to me, if you say you can only have the unhosted ones in RP, but then you allow for something softer, maybe where people are allowed to rent their home for 20 or 30 days a year, then that, but they have to live there for the, the 100 and whatever other amount of days that they have to be there, and that has to be their primary residence, and they have to pay, they have to submit it as their primary residence or whatever. That, to me, then are basically allowing it, but you're restricting the really hard part to this one tiny spot. And then I think that if you were to have that challenged, you would hold up.
I'm open to discussing the option as the second tier.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think the
You
second
know.
tier is my vote too.
Yeah.
And,
Right.
and limiting the permits, just to clarify, I want to track that. I don't think that's a good idea.
Well-
Right? Because there's also, sometimes there's a need for our residents to, like was mentioned, there's a fixed income, there may be a hardship. To restrict the possibility of that option is something that I wouldn't want to do. But I like what Laura's saying is that we're just really put some guardrails on what a hosted would look like.
Yeah.
Then we're meeting the code across the board. We're meeting both users across the board.
And you're making it really hard to have an unhosted Airbnb.
And just to be clear, this would not set aside any house sitting arrangements where they're not renting the property. They're paying a house sitter partly by allowing them to live on premises.
Yeah.
It wouldn't prohibit the exchanges that, I don't know if they're as popular as they used to be, but for a while in academia, professors would change schools for a semester and take each other's homes as well. I know it used to happen. I don't know if it still does, but there are those kind of arrangements. I've heard of it with pulpit exchanges too, where ministers will change pulpits and live in each other's parsonage and all that. It wouldn't affect any of that because we're strictly talking about the short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Correct?
For fee.
Yep.
For a fee.
And I guess, no, I agree, Leslie, that, all those other scenarios are different, right? The landlord's paying somebody to house it, right? But coming back to Laura, what Laura said and the discussion we're having, Mr. Hess, right? So at least personally for me, right, if we had to make a choice today between a very restrictive code to short-term rentals that has a finite probability of losing in a lawsuit, but finite probability, right? And this is all, right, looking in the crystal ball to some extent, right? Or educated-based judgment versus a more liberal code to short-term rentals, looking into the hosted versus unhosted. I would actually tend to go for the first one. I'm kind of telegraphing.
I am just telling you, I mean, these codes are challenged fairly regularly. It's a regularly challenged code. Airbnb will even challenge them occasionally. So I really think we should craft one that is fair and reasonable and not the most restrictive just because we can.
Right. And so here's where I'm coming from. And that's why I got into that little bit of semantics earlier, right? The question is, what does fair actually mean here? Right? For me, I can't equate in that scale of fairness the desire of a homeowner living there or not living there to rent a property on a method that didn't exist 10 years ago in the town of Niskuna to someone who moves into the town of Niskuna to buy a property to live there as a resident and have that be their home and have that be their neighborhood. I don't see equating those two things as being a definition of fairness. I think fairness here has to be for what has this community historically been and historically has been marketing to people who want to move here as residents. I think fairness is establishing their expectation.
But there is an equity thing too, and that if you're going to allow some homeowners to profit from these short-term rentals, you kind of have to be sure you're being fair to the other homeowners and not denying them the same right, unless you've got a sound basis for doing that. And we would need to articulate that very carefully. And
I think there is an assumption. We're assuming that no one would want to rent their house when we're saying protecting, the climate of the community. There are people that are going to want to rent their house just for the financial benefit of it, and some of them need it. I think that what we need to protect is the integrity of Niskayuna. So we want to prevent those who are coming in to encroach and like I say, that are not invested. And that's what we can say, that if you're buying a house solely for the purpose of renting, then that needs to be commercial, because it is like you're buying a mini hotel, because you don't intend to live there. You don't intend to, establish your residence or your family there. You're just renting a room, cleaning it and renting again. That is what a hotel does. That is a commercial entity, in my opinion, and that should be put into industrialized areas. I think taking the option from people who want to get some income, I don't think is equitable. And I think people who are truly just trying to get some money to, help support their way of life, they're not going to want to rent to people who are going to destroy their house, because they're going to have to come back and live there. They're vested. So they do have care. So I think it'll be a different type of, like I said, it just goes back to intention. And I think those that are just buying homes to rent should be treated like a business.
yeah, and we don't allow that in our residential zones.
It should be in an industrial. That's what I think should be set aside.
I tend to agree with Mr. Khan's approach of making this a pretty restricted proposal. I'm fully supportive of one zone. I don't agree with having the different levels to the different residential zones. I think we could select a zone. There's very few, I've done a little bit of reading on this, but there's very few municipalities, and they're large municipalities, that have tried to outlaw this, that are held up in litigation. So I don't think that, Niskayuna as a bedroom community wants to promote. This is going to open the door. So if you've done or read any of the previous comprehensive plans, things that you didn't think would happen 10 years later are now coming. So you're on the precipice of redevelopment of, single family homes on 2 lots coming down for a larger home to go up. That's going to happen. And this is just the first step of what happens when a neighborhood turns, or potentially could turn, into short-term rentals. The person that bought the house that we're currently having an issue with, if they rent that 30 weekends a year, they're making money. They may do this for a few years and dump the house, and they'll probably make their money back out of it pretty close. So it's just, someone's found a niche, they've gotten in. It's a business plan that's not highly regulated, and there's other bedroom communities where this is starting to pop up. So I think we take this, in my opinion, would be take this and make it as rigorous as you possibly can for a permitted use, almost like we were talking about with the adult novelty things.
Dave, just Mr.
What zone are you
Darpino,
proposing for this?
We could determine what zone that should be.
Yep, we can have that discussion.
Right.
can you clarify whether it's hosted or non-hosted? You're looking at both the same,
I look at both the same.
same thing restricted to a smaller area?
Correct.
Both, okay.
That would simplify it, that's for sure, huh?
And look, Ms. Gomes, to the comment you've made, right? I again think that from the principles of zoning, right, enabling a resident to earn money by being able to conduct a business in their home, it's really not one of our objectives, right? I don't think that's an objective of planning and zoning.
So putting ourselves in the seats of our majority of our residents, let's say, or what our town was based on, and maybe some people on this board can speak to it, but I like the restrictive part a lot. In fact, I had suggested we do not allow any permits more than a year and a half or a year and 3 months, and then no renewal. It forces the house to go back on the market. It prevents it from a long-term income property, and does some other things along those lines, which is what my intention was. But you're an engineer, R&D. You have a 6-month opportunity. It's a lateral move, but you're going to make the move. You need to make some income to make that move happen, but you can't rent your house on short-term rental, Airbnb, which everyone else's peers are able to do. Like, what do we do in that for those residents? Is it something we address or don't address?
I mean, we're going a little bit too further down the hypotheticals part, but I know this factually, right? The case you described, that's happened countless number of times.
And it works.
In history. It works.
They
You
don't
always
rent
find a
it.
way.
They don't rent it. It's just whatever.
You always find it. Especially since what we're talking about here is a 30-month consecutive short-term rental.
30 months or less.
I'm sorry, 30 days.
30 days, you're right, 30 days or less. So in that situation, it's drafted, which we have a lot of residents that fall in the category. It's outside of this, of this permit use. All right, I agree with that.
Well,
then.
even short term, I mean, not to push it out to another county, but the town of Colony has numerous number of extended stay places. Right on Wolf Road, there's like 2 or 3 of them. So it, not to toss everybody out of Niskiuna, but that's what those places are there for.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point that Strang made, right? And, again, what I'm associated with in the town, we lived through that, right? And so there was a time when you couldn't get a decent hotel anywhere near, Schenectady or Niskiuna. And the dynamics of the region has changed, and today it's there. So the fact that Niskiuna had some of these rules, we were able to preserve that bedroom character of this town. The world changed around us in terms of allowing people access to extended stay or nicer hotels or whatever else it is, that they didn't have to commute from the Desmond or commute from the Crown Plaza in Albany. But so that was a win-win, right? The rest of the county did what it had to do, and Niskiuna stuck to, we're here to promote something for the residents who chose to live here and dwell here.
Mr. Hess asked what our legal questions were. Mine is, how far can we go in restricting the number of days per year that any one property can be rented out on a short-term basis? Because I think allowing almost a half year is too much.
Fair question. Let me find out.
In my mind, if you're renting it out half the time, it's not really your residence as much as a commercial enterprise.
Yeah.
So I would like that number. 30 days would work for me up to 90, but I'm not comfortable with almost half the year.
I really read that wrong because when I first read the hosted, I thought they were only allowed to rent their house for up to 14 days.
But it was,
Would be
no, they were
like,
setting a little
okay,
minimum.
2 weeks, you're going to Florida, you rent your home or something like that, or a couple weekends a year.
My read on that one, Laura, is that given the nature of town of Elba, they actually want everyone who's signed up to be a short-term rental to practice that short-term rental for a minimum of 14 days at least. They don't want you to say, I'm a short-term rental, but I'm never going to do a rental in 365
Yeah, I'm only doing like 3 weekends a year.
Yeah,
or
because,
something like
and my hunch is that because we've all seen it, right? They get to a point where every room gets needed a certain time of the year in a place like Lake Placid,
Mhm.
right? And so they're hoping that folks will just coalesce and rent those out in the right months. Those 14 minimum. It was weird that they put a minimum on it, for me at least. And it means that they're actually forcing a registered short-term renter, right, to maintain an occupancy.
They have to rent.
They have to
for
rent
at
for at
least
least
2 weeks a
14
year.
I'd like to know the legal, if it's possible. I liked what Chris suggested about only allowing people to do a certain amount of time and then, okay, your permit's up, you're done.
Can you
Because
restrict
Yeah.
the time period to, and the number of, can you restrict the number of permits allowed and also how long a permit can last for?
Because that would be ideal. That would be ideal. You would truly.
Yeah, I'm not
discourage
100% sure about this, but I feel like when I was reading it, this code was litigated and survived. So, and they have a couple things like the number
Yeah.
of days.
Yeah,
So-
also further down too, I think they, like, if you look at number 4, or maybe it is number 3, but if you can scroll a little bit
Oh,
lower.
down further?
Yeah, just scroll down to see what number 3 says.
Number.
Yeah, I mean, 3B, right? It was, or B, it wasn't 3, yeah, B, right? Granted, I know they're talking about lodging and unhosted, fine, right? But they're at that second tier there.
Yes, I mean, because they like, I know we've talked about this for a long time and we can scroll down, but they don't allow the lodging and the unhosted in any residential district.
Right.
So, I mean, they're taking like the same approach that we're, well, one of the approaches that we discussed, which basically says that any commercial type Airbnb cannot be in a residential
Right.
zone.
And Laura, I mean, like I said, again, speak for myself, there are a few other voices on the board too, right? I hear what you're saying, and for me, it's going to boil down to within the legal, within the legal foreshadowing of what puts us in some kind of lawsuit jeopardy versus not, what is the most restrictive that we can go?
Okay.
Right? By way of both zoning, by way of both type, hosted, unhosted, by way of both, limiting, whatever limiting factors we have.
Can't argue with
available.
that.
And our connective tissue is that we are a bedroom community.
Yeah, and knowing fully well that we'll never know until we get sued.
Right.
But we've gotten sued for other things, right?
I think we're coming at it from different angles, but I think we're sort of all headed the same way. We want to preserve our town.
Okay, so the next section is all about the wait list, which only applies if we set a cap on permits. So I don't feel like we really need to get into that.
Well, before that, I want to go back to
Oh.
seeing on page 9, I had one word, the exclamation point. There's no maximum limit on the number of days.
Oh, yeah.
I have a great big no exclamation point. I don't agree with that. I think there needs to be an absolute maximum number of days.
Okay. I mean, I think that if you allow an unhosted in a certain area, it's probably going to be allowed for the duration of the whole year. I mean,
I don't think anything should go more than a half year or just under a half year. And I'm really hoping we can go for even less.
Now, if they're in the zoning district that, if we pick like, I don't know, pick one.
If it's in a commercial zone where
Yeah.
we would allow a hotel or motel, that's a different story.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, I think, yeah.
But
So it would
this-
depend on which districts it ends up being allowed in, but something to pay attention to.
And we actually have no hotels or motels.
Although they are allowed in the CN zoning district.
Yeah.
Okay.
We almost sort of have
Yeah, I know
one.
the inn, but it didn't make it. Okay, so I don't think we need to discuss the wait list because that's kind of the only other thing to really look at.
The appeals board.
I think this is all sort of kind of related to whatever zones you choose to put it in to. So all of that's in yellow because that's kind of the meat of where you let it go. But then at the end, this I thought just was generally speaking kind of fine. Complaints and violations, it has a process for the complaint. This is something we'd have to talk to the police because this says they can contact law enforcement. They have an online portal. We don't have those things, and I have to talk to police. Normally, it would be contacting the code enforcement officer. Oops. So the first thing that they have to do is that the property owner, the person who's making the complaint, can find the information of the property owner, and the property owner has 60 minutes to resolve the complaint on their own. Like, so for instance, like if a neighbor called them and said there's a party in the house, then the owner can go there and break the party up on their own. That's the first step of the complaint. process. And then if in 60 minutes it doesn't get fixed by the owner, then a written complaint goes to the code enforcement officer with the time, and then the code enforcement officer can go and investigate the complaint. They can attach reasonable conditions to the existing permit, issue a warning of violation, suspend the short-term rental permit, or revoke the short-term rental permit based on the complaint. If it's revoked, this goes to, I think, your question, see, they cannot re-obtain it sooner than 1 year after the date, but that sort of implies that you might be able to get it the next year. Yeah. Then they also can initiate enforcement proceedings if they give them the complaint and they continue to, or if they revoke the permit or whatever and they continue to do these things. And they have the right to inspect the process. This one I highlighted in yellow because that they have their own short-term rental appeals board, which reviews, it's sort of, I think, like a mediator between complaints. So if a person who receives a determination by the enforcement officer that, they violated the permit or they revoked their permit, they have the right to appeal to their short-term rental appeals board within 30 days of that decision. And the appeals board can listen to everything and can reverse, affirm, or modify the decision of the code enforcement officer. If we do enact this code, I do not think we need a separate board. I think that would just go to the zoning board. Yeah. I don't think we need that. Personally.
Zoning Board of Appeals.
Yeah, zoning board of appeals. Yeah. I think the only issue there is that, I think they're trying to make this a shorter process because the zoning board allows 60 days and this is 30. So I think they're trying to resolve the issue between the owner and the appeals board faster. But in this unit, I think it'd be okay because the zoning board has up to 60 days to hear the case.
Yeah, I think we're situated very differently.
Yeah.
Because they have a vested interest in making some rooms available
Yeah.
I would hope you
for
didn't
their
have that
tourist
many.
season.
And then penalties, fine. The first fine is $1,000. The second fine is $2,000. The third fine is $3,000.
All within a 5-year period.
Right. And then I think if we reference it to our code, it's not in here, but our general code allows, if they're not paying their fees or if the judge says, we can also threaten jail time. It's not a lot of jail time, but our codes usually allow some jail time. And then the last section is, the general legally things that if there's something invalid in the law, one thing doesn't invalidate the entire law, and then it'll take effect immediately.
I appreciate that, like the immediately.
Yeah, that's the home rule.
Yeah.
Some codes when you adopt, they have to wait, but I think if you update your zoning code, it can take effect. We may not actually need that because we're putting it into our zoning code chapter, but those are pretty standard things that they put in laws when we're adopting them.
I think it indicates a commitment.
Yeah.
All right, so Laura, thank you for working on this. So what's next? We talked about putting it in a Word document, cleaning it up, some of the things you heard tonight, and getting it in a Word document, getting it out to the board so we can do markups and to help out the planning office better, so she can take all the comments and put them together. And if they're questionable, she still has them, and she could say there's still a question on that comment, and we can at least have a master that we can all work from.
Right.
And then that would be included in the packet so the public could see it, where we're at before any meeting. So it would be included there. And of course, we need some legal advice, especially I think the major question about one zone only. And if we have one zone for whether it be, unoccupied or not, I guess it would be not.
Unhosted.
Unhosted.
It's not terribly complicated because the meat of the code on the front and the back, I think we can fix.
Mhm.
So it's really just that one yellow section.
Yep.
I mean, maybe we could sort of look at writing it two ways.
That's right. Yeah, and like I said, I think we could coalesce on something if we keep the hierarchy in mind, right?
Yeah.
But I at least just wanted to put forward, for me at least, the important thing is now some of these legal questions, right? We don't want to. Yeah.
And I hate to ask this, I got to ask, moratorium, if that's come up at all, is there any opportunity for a moratorium for short-term rentals?
So I've never, since, even when I was town attorney, we never enacted a moratorium, but towns do it all the time. So let me look into what the,
I mean, the moratorium, would be on a go-forward basis. It was a pre-existing
Yeah.
use. It wouldn't, you wouldn't be able to shut it down, but it would prevent until we come up with a code.
Right. So just to be clear, the basis for the moratorium would be now that this body's officially addressing this.
Yeah, this body,
We
the
want
town
to issue
board.
a moratorium in parallel.
Yeah,
But
the town-
just so that like the audience understands, and Rob will look into it, but I think if you enact a moratorium,
It's not going to
it
grandfather.
won't work on the ones that are
Right.
existing.
It's already there.
If there's
Too
already a
late.
contract in place.
Right.
the other potential issue is the status quo is that we allow them. So we have to look at what you can accomplish with a moratorium.
Yeah, I mean,
Right. That's true.
but a moratorium, what we're going to accomplish is putting legislation in place to control them. And so we obviously would force the issue to make sure you get it done, but, the moratorium sometimes can be 6 months or a year kind of thing, But anyway, take a look at it.
Yep.
I'm surprised I always ask that question.
So I guess I do have to ask this question in that light, and maybe this is part of the publicity that we give to the activity that we're going through. If we go through and we adopt the code,
Okay, you're not going to adopt it.
I'm sorry, if we go through, we recommend a code
Yeah.
to the town board adopts it.
Yeah.
We're not restrictive. Now it's a code.
Yep.
Properties, will they have to be, or are they excluded?
It's regulation. So I don't think they're not grandfathered in on that.
Okay.
That's my gut feeling. So let me check and I'll get back to you.
Okay, I guess
That's
it's
my gut feeling as well. But I mean, you could imagine though, like they're gonna have something to say.
I would think if they have a contract in place, but I might be wrong.
a contract with whom?
The only reason that may not be true is it's an annual license.
We have no license.
So we don't have a.
I know,
Yeah.
but if
Already
you
now.
adopt the code,
And
you
they
have
are,
an annual
they
license.
rented out the property in good faith, and I think they would prevail. I might be wrong, though.
Yeah, I don't know
I'm an
either.
attorney, we know that.
Yeah, so maybe a request to issue a moratorium on our current default practice, which is they're allowed, as we go through this process, might have some merit.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth asking. Yeah, at least it might prevent the problem from growing until we get something in place. May not help everybody, but it might help somebody. Okay. All right. Anything else? So you got work cut out, Laura, look back out to us and we'll mark her up.
Yeah, the minutes from this section will be really
Oh,
important.
boy.
Longer than usual until the next meeting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Laura, thank you very much.
Yeah.
I mean, it's,
Oh yeah,
you know,
no problem at all.
I appreciated that started from the grassroots and then got to the big picture.
Yeah.
But I think I found it instructive for seeing the complexity of the grassroots. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and like I said, this is the second code, and I do think it was litigated, which is why there's so much backup documentation to this code.
I miss having access to LexisNexis.
Yeah.
Okay, is that it for this subject
So
for tonight?
helpful.
You all set here?
Thank you very much, Laura.
Thanks, Laura.
Thanks for guiding us through that.
The applicant for State Street came up.
Yep. State Street applicant. State Street applicant. Okay, well, we can go back to that if you like.
Totally up to you.
Yeah, let's go back for a second. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for coming. So regarding State Street, we have an applicant on board. Maybe we can have him introduce himself then. For 3905, right? Let's see.
Yeah, hi. Can you guys hear me?
Yep. So we had a solution last meeting, but I don't want to say it was complex, but there was a lot of things that were in there. And since you weren't available, we were concerned about
I'm
going
sorry,
forward
I-
with it, so we tabled it. We had the same resolution come up tonight. It's still under unfinished business. We did get some new information, took a look at the parking in the front yard, and there's some concerns there about, backing up into traffic and visibility with the monument sign. I don't know if you heard the beginning of the meeting or not. There was some discussion early on regarding that. We didn't know that you were available tonight. So we also
Yeah.
tabled that resolution. The thought is that there's some questions about the parking, about what signage intent, whether or not the front yard could be used for maybe 1 or 2 vehicles, being a handicapped, and 2 if even possible, because it's hard to back out of there into, traffic. So the thought is having a handicapped only in front. They could access and ingress, egress safely. That would require you or whoever is operating the business to, everybody to basically park out back. Negative of that, of course, you don't see a car. If there's no car in front, you don't know whether the business is open, but I guess you could do that with signage, with an open sign or something in the front.
Perfect.
But we need to, I guess, sit down and either sit down or you to take a look at the resolution. I don't know if you've reviewed it or not, to see whether you're okay with the things that were in there, and then also answer the question regarding the front yard and parking in the front yard. Front yard meaning the front of the building. All right.
Yes.
Did you have an opportunity to take a look at the resolution?
I did not.
Okay, so we won't be able to act on that tonight. So my suggestion, Mr. Henry or Ms. Robertson in the planning department, meeting with Dave DiArpino, the project lead, and walk through the resolution and the front yard parking and see if you're okay, or have a suggestion on how to resolve the concern with the front yard parking. And then we can take, for both of us, come up with a revised or at least an addendum to the unfinished resolution, and then we'll move it forward. Office, and let's set that up so we can come through it. Next meeting, so the sooner the better. If we can come through it, we can get the resolution for approval on the 10th.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
Okay, you okay with that?
I'm okay. Yeah, I can. Yeah, it's really dangerous. I seen that, especially the road is really fast with traffic and stuff like that. So I was concerned about that. I talked to the owner, and he goes, "Well, the old business we're operating, right? You just like being too much." So I was like, "Well, it's not me. It's the city law."
Yeah. Yeah, and the important thing too is to take a look at the resolution and the conditions that are in there, make sure that they're doable and you don't have any concerns with those also. We got to get your feedback also. All right?
Perfect. Also, I talked to about the, opening up the entrance from the back is actually shared with the people upstairs, upstairs. And I talked to her, the lady that lives upstairs, and she's comfortable that people coming in and out, that shared area.
Okay, so there's a rental unit upstairs?
Yeah, there's a unit.
Yeah, well.
Okay, that changes,
Yeah, it changes, the parking, and whether or not it's allowed. And that, so obviously the planning office will have to take a look at that also. Own the
Right.
building?
No, I do not.
Okay, is your plan on owning the building or leasing it?
No, I lease it. I actually have the lease. I've been leasing it for 3 months.
Okay. All right, well,
Yeah.
we'll take a look at that.
yes, do we need to contact the owner?
I think I don't know if it's included in your packet, but I think the owner signed that and allowing the stuff.
Allowing him to represent
Yeah,
himself.
yeah.
So we
Yeah,
should have
but
the
we
owners,
should-
we should have the owner's information.
No, okay,
Yeah.
yeah, but we didn't know about that the owner is also renting our upstairs. room.
Right, but that's, planning office will look into that.
Yeah,
Whether it's allowed and there's any concerns with that.
Yeah. He told me that he just bought the building 4 months ago.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so planning office will take a look into that, and that'll be part of the discussion if there's any concerns there.
just became complicated for you, Dave.
All right.
Thanks.
I deal with
Sorry
a lot
about that. We
tougher
appreciate
things.
your
Huh?
patience and, and take a look at what, it's all available online. If you don't have a copy that was emailed to you, just take a look at the packet online. Okay? All
All right.
right.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
This is commercial highway, right?
Commercial highway, yeah. Yep. Yep.
All right. All right, so we can go on to reports, 3410 State Street. I don't know if that's Clark or Laura.
Well, actually, the owner is online. So the reason we put it under a report is just because we have such a different distance between the next meeting. But we've been working with Mr. Serafini about the fact that his site plan review expired for the pod and the addition wasn't built. And he's currently under enforcement with the town of Niskayuna. But he has some ideas of how he might be able to improve the property that he wanted to talk to you guys about to get some feedback for potentially submitting for the next meeting. Greg, do you want to go ahead?
Good evening. How's everybody doing?
Great, thank you.
Good. So my first question, actually, after having listened to this previous discussion, what would I have to do to get the pod approved for a short-term rental?
I thought you already had that approval, Mr. Serafini, and that's what we're discussing.
It seems that way. It seems that way. So basically, the conversation that I've had with Laura and Clark and the town attorney, we've had some changes over the last couple of years while the site plan review application or approval was in place in regards to state laws. I've been attempting to respond to those state laws. Actually, we have a court case that has been in for about a year and a half in regards to that. So it's left me with some, I'll call it some questions on how to change things there and still maintain my my compliance with the state laws. As such, unfortunately, the addition didn't get put on just yet. So what we've discussed is ways to take the box that's there and soften the impact to everybody around us. My first thought was to turn it into a garage. So, build around it, side it, make it look like it just belongs as part of the neighborhood. But my contractor actually came up with what I believe is an even better solution that makes it a more temporary solution, but gives us all the visual solution. So essentially what he can do is he can fur out the box, side it so it looks like, again, a garage, part of our building, so it'll match in, and allow everything to be, as soft as we can while we deal with, the legal issues that are beyond our control and right now beyond our understanding on what's going to work and what's not.
I'm confused. So what was his suggestion?
So essentially, instead of building a permanent structure around the box, his suggestion was to take and actually make the box that structure so that it can still be pulled out as soon as all of this is settled and the addition can go forward. So essentially, he would fur, which is kind of, for anybody who doesn't know the building process, kind of build out where a wall can be attached to it. Essentially, he attaches wood to the steel box, and then he runs siding on it so it would look like the building itself.
I got you. But trying to refresh my memory here, but you have a accessory structure in the front yard along Albany Street. Is that correct, Laura?
If you made, so it hasn't been treated as an accessory structure in the front yard because it was a temporary pod that got a time extension. But if you were to treat it as a permanent sort of structure in the property, then it would need a variance for being.
Right. So we're right back to the zoning board of appeals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which we worked with, and made suggestions, and they took those suggestions in order to allow the periodicity in order to, put your addition on. So it just seems like, again, you mentioned the words temporary. Can you tell us what the use of the box, why whatever's in the box can't be moved into the building?
I cannot discuss that in any of these forums. As you know, the nature of my business is very specific and security conscious. So I cannot discuss what's in the box. I think you can talk to Laura and Clark
All right, well,
separate.
let me ask it differently. You don't have to tell me what's in it. What's in it? Can it be moved into the building?
As we understand the law, no, it cannot.
Hmm.
And this is the law that you're currently challenging?
Correct. So this took effect in September of 22, and we challenged it almost immediately. And we are actually at our 4th Supreme Court of the United States motion on the preliminaries. And once the Supreme Court makes a decision on this 4th motion, we will be moving forward with the actual federal case at the, I believe it's 4th district, which is based out of Syracuse. But we've been in court for a year and a half over this.
How about, could the box be relocated to the side yard, which I know you'd lose parking spaces, but can it come out the front yard and still accomplish its purpose?
I'm not sure how to answer that, only because my property is, I'll call it unique, but my property is a real pain in the rear end because everything is essentially right there and there's no setbacks that would.
Well, forget about setbacks, because that's what you're here for, because you got a problem with setback now. You're in the front yard with a box. So if you could put it in the side yard within reasonable setbacks, that's just be a temporarily again, at least it gets it out of the front yard along Albany Street, and you could still make it
So
look like a garage.
where would you consider my side yard to be?
Facing your building to the left, the parking lot.
So if I'm facing it from the roadway, from State Street,
Yep.
we could put it in on the left.
I'm not saying you can, I'm saying we could talk about it,
Okay, but I just want to, for this portion of the discussion, understand where you mean. So I would have it tucked in, like running parallel to my building,
Something
or
like that. I mean, again, we're just talking here, either that or further out in the parking lot, away from the building, whatever it takes. I mean, it's
I
away from
think
the- it's away
moving
from the
it
building
closer
now.
to the bus stop and further away from my control would be probably a bad choice. Tucking it closer to the building, we could definitely do that, but I don't see how that accomplishes what we're hoping to do, which is minimize the impact around us while the situation resolves.
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of the neighborhood, minimizing the impact of Albany Street and having a container in the front yard. Unfortunately, your property, as you know, has 2 front yards, right? And that's part of the problem here.
Yeah, it is definitely a challenging property to work with.
So what would you be looking for us to do, or what could we do, or what should we be doing? Anything? I mean, we gave you approval. It was contingent. The zoning board of appeals gave you approval contingent, and it hasn't happened. So, I mean, I don't,
So those approvals are completely expired
exactly.
by 6 months. What I think Craig is trying to ask is he has to go through the enforcement process with the town, and he's currently Elena's researching what that is going to entail, but he wants to submit another site plan application. So he has to go through enforcement process with the town, which he's working on Elena with. But in the meantime, he doesn't think, or at least our discussions with him based on the timeline of the case, that he's going to be able to put the addition in. So what we talked about with him was possibly resubmitting a site plan application that had all of the site improvements that we talked about. Because when we did review this before, we talked about like adding grass here and planting all along there and doing landscaping and buffering. And so like one of the things that I think he's considering would be doing all of that site improvement, but rather than putting an addition on the building, asking for site plan approval to enclose the pod to make it look more residential.
Yeah, but I don't think that was our original intent, right?
No,
I
it
mean,
was not the original.
So I guess what I'd like to understand is what are the options available here? It seems like there's some legal.
So
process.
essentially, I find myself in a quandary, is the way I'm going to phrase it. In order to comply with the new state laws, I am in a situation where that box, in my opinion and my attorney's opinion, needs to remain in place. The compliance with state laws is important for a lot of different reasons, but one of which is because any non-compliance actually turns into criminal charges against me. Interestingly enough, general business law violations are now criminal charges in my industry. So that is problem number one for me. Problem number two is, again, I came to you for the approval to put an addition on because I do need the additional space in my building to keep my business thriving and, keep it relevant. So I am trying to find a temporary solution till we get through the court portion of this before I can do the permanent solution, which I still hope is putting the addition on so that we get what we came for initially, but, we keep everybody happy in the meantime. And it's a balancing act, which I've run out of ideas on how to juggle.
Can I ask a question? Craig, my name is Nancy. I'm part of the board. I just have a question for you. What,
Sure.
And maybe I missed this. Why didn't you do what you were approved for to begin with? Did I miss that?
You didn't. So initially we were within our timeframes, and the intent was to put the addition on. We had gotten the approvals to do so. We had done the engineering all the way through. We were at architectural review. We were having a couple of hiccups with that because it was coming off of COVID, and they wanted some specifics as far as materials, and that we couldn't get them at that point in time. Prior to us being able to actually go to put the addition on, so while we were still within what would have been acceptable timeframes for our approval, the laws changed within the state for my industry, and it put me in a situation where making a change to the property at that point in time became my issue. And so essentially my feeling was I did not communicate that properly with the town, and I have nobody to blame but myself. Unfortunately, I became so focused on the other aspect of what I was dealing with the legalities that I did not focus on the town aspect. And so that essentially is the answer. I timed myself out.
I'm sorry, I still don't get it.
I don't either.
So
His microphone, I don't know if it's catching your. No, was it? Okay. Just want to make sure, Rob, it's hard to hear you.
Here's what I don't understand. Is there something about the legislation that your industry is challenging in the federal district court in Syracuse that prohibits you from installing the addition that was approved? So is there a reason that you just can't start the process again and reapply for the same site plan approval, get the same variance, and then do that?
So essentially, yes, we can apply for that. The issue that we're dealing with is in regards specifically to secure storage. And the terminology that's used in the law is we use the term vault. And so we've been approved by state police the way things are. We've tried to get a clarification that if we were to go to a stick structure for that, if that would be acceptable. They refuse to answer that question. We are challenging the law completely. And that's where the dance is, because right now we know we are in compliance with the law. My attorney feels that if we make that change to a stick structure, we will no longer be in compliance with the law.
Okay, so as you know, I'm not handling the code enforcement. I'm just of counsel to this board. But it may be the case that this site is just not a good fit for your business.
And maybe that's the case. I would hate to have to leave Niskayuna over, a technicality, which is the way I look at it. I know there are other properties in the town of Niskayuna that have been granted permanent use of storage containers. And, I would hate to have to leave because, I was not able to have the same use of the storage container.
Okay, but let me just
especially
say,
while we're dealing with this.
from my perspective, and again, I haven't handled the code enforcement, but this is 4 years after the fact that we've had temporary storage in essentially the front yard of this business on a pretty busy street.
Okay, I understand exactly what you're saying. You know, unfortunately, I have nowhere else to put that container. And, you know, it again comes down to, I'm in an untenable situation. I mean, yes, I can close my business and leave Niskuna if that's what it takes, but I felt that would be counterproductive to me and to the town. But if that's what the board feels is the proper course, I will start looking for another property somewhere else.
Craig, what about, one thing you didn't mention is instead of the addition or utilizing this container, can you do off-site storage in an approved area?
No, unfortunately, both under federal and state law, the storage of anything that needs to go in that container is required to remain on our property. Wherever our license is, that's where that has to remain.
Craig, this is David Darpino. I was a project lead on this.
Yes.
Did you look at different type of building typologies with your architect? I know that your original addition appeared to probably be, we'll call it wood frame, stick building. Did you look at heavy gauge cold form metal framing versus a masonry shell that's reinforced? I mean, I know some of this, I know some of this construction technology that is used for,
to be honest,
facilities.
I didn't. That's beyond my knowledge point. So no, I did not.
Well, I guess the point I'm trying to arrive at is that, you might be able to take the footprint that you currently have and just look at what different options there are for the constructability of this. And that may mean sandwiching in some metal plates or, anti, I'm trying to look at like anti, that's the word I'm looking for, like not vandalism, but like deterrent type materials that you could construct the walls with, because you don't have a lot of fenestration on the building. There aren't a lot of openings on that addition. We even talked about like false windows and things like that. So essentially you're building a shell. And I think that if you wanted to reapply and come up with what board would probably have an aggressive timeline, they might grant you, like talk about getting an extension granted for the storage container, coming up with a really good set of plans on what you think you could afford to build. And if you could do that within, a month or two, I don't know what the timeline is, but come up with a realistic budget with a contractor. This is a pretty manageable addition. It's not really large. There may be a larger picture that you're arguing in the courts, which is fine. That may be something that helps you down the line or helps other owners in your industry. But I just think that exploring the type of constructability for what you have to build there would be the first and foremost thing that you may want to do.
I agree with you. A lot of it, again, comes down to the fact that we can't get a solid answer on what is acceptable and not acceptable to the state. But one of the things that did come up in the last week after we discussed it with the town was actually using what we have there and incorporating that into a structure, into the addition. Like you've seen, I'm sure, the tiny houses, things like that, where they will actually use these containers as, part of the structure on, left wall, whatever it may be. So we're actually looking at that for, if it would work, the engineer and architect are trying to work through that. So we're trying to use what we know is acceptable. The other pieces that you talked about, we can go down the road with it. I'm absolutely content with it. The biggest challenge is because I need to ensure that whatever we do will meet the compliance that I have to follow.
Yeah, I think Dave makes a great point. There's a couple of different options there, the proposed addition, the construction utilized in order to make it that it's can be used for the purpose that it is, or incorporating the storage pod into the building, whether that's, putting some kind of a foundation or a pad, putting it in and then enclosing that with siding and the fake windows and having access from inside your building to your storage area. If it's compliant now, then it would be compliant that way, would be my view. You think it would
That's
be?
actually literally what we were talking about in the last week, and I had spoken to Clark about that, I think on Wednesday or Thursday last week.
Yeah, you're making an encapsulated vault, which is a Connex basically,
Exactly.
which is, very, very thick steel. But I guess the concern is that obviously the stuff that you're currently storing in there is not sensitive to atmospheric changes or temperature, correct? Doesn't matter if it's hot, cold.
It doesn't change its ability to survive.
Right. Okay. So you have high humidity,
Yeah, it's in a
cold
box.
cold
Yeah.
temperatures. It's a metal box. So if you want to make that as a vault and construct around that, I don't see any issues with that. That's just encapsulating
Okay,
something.
so the board in general will say is not against that concept.
I think you got a couple of options, but we need to, you need to take it further, get some sketches of what the proposal is.
Yeah, it's got to be the addition that was approved is a permanent structure,
Yeah.
not something that would, backing up the Connex next to the building
Exactly.
and then
And putting
siding it on 3 sides and putting a shed roof on it.
Correct. I was only offering that as a short-term solution while we got through the rest of this. That's why I had said it that way, but a long-term solution is what my desire is.
Well, I guess we could entertain that, but in parallel, would still go forward with code enforcement.
Well,
And
you think you have to at this point,
yeah,
right?
you have to, yeah. So what we could do though is, and if David's willing, because you've spent a lot of time with this already, David, maybe you can meet with Craig over there.
Sure.
Is that something, Craig? You okay with that?
Absolutely. I encourage anybody to come on by, take a look inside the building, because I think that's going to give you an idea why the addition is so important to me. You'll see how cramped we are, and you'll understand why I am committed to the addition.
Yeah. It's just hard. You got to, understand it's hard from our point of view. We worked hard with you. Okay. We don't see all the things that have occurred, but we've worked hard on the zoning board of appeals when we had a real good plan with a good timeline in place. So it's, so it's hard for us, or at least hard for me to swallow, that we're not there. Right. And we have to go through a code enforcement action and start looking at things over again. You made the statement that there's other people with pods that are utilizing them. I'm sure the Target. Yep. It's in the rear yard. So, and we knew about those. They were on a site plan and everything too, right? Yeah. Yeah. So, it's take a look. Yeah, we'll get Dave over there. Dave's got some great ideas and see if he can come up with something. But I think the expectation is that if something happens, though, just can't keep going on,
Yeah. I mean, I guess one of the summary things is that pending legislation that you're involved in, if the storage container meets the requirement, then we should be building an addition that meets the requirement. Without that legislation ever happening favorably, right?
That's what David said.
Having that
Yeah,
favorable
there's
outcome.
other
Yeah,
ways
yeah,
of
I'm just
construction.
I'm summarizing it in a different way of saying it, right?
Yep, exactly.
And I think those are the options that we should be looking at.
Yeah. Yeah. Either
I
construct-
agree. And like I said, that's where we came to last week, and now we're working on the engineering to go along with that.
Yeah, I mean, it protects your business and also, qualifies for the path that the town is on, right? You can't hang your hat that the Supreme Court's going to rule one way or another, right?
Yep.
I don't think we can trust the courts to rule any which way. We got to just wait and see what they do with anything.
All right. So
Yeah,
David, so David, reach out to David and anybody else that's, if you put that out in case anybody else wants to join, as long as we don't have a quorum, anybody else that's interested in the planning office can go over and take a look also. All right. At least we'll take
Absolutely.
the next step at least.
Absolutely.
All right.
Now, if you guys don't mind, I wanted to throw in my 2 cents on your previous discussion. Just because I've worked with the
Yeah.
board.
If
My
it's, if
whole
it's
company-
regarding short-term rentals, Craig, it's not the topic and that's more of a privilege of the floor things. I'm sorry, but we can have that.
Okay, I just wanted to give you
Yeah, yeah,
ideas, but no problem.
It's just because there's nobody here and it's not on the agenda, so. But
enough.
we appreciate any input. You can always
Yeah, yeah,
email also.
Yeah, you
Privilege of
guys-
the floor and email. You can
We
email Craig.
appreciate all the help we can
yeah,
get, always.
thanks.
You got it. All
All
right,
right,
folks, you have a
thanks.
great night. David, I'll speak to you tomorrow or the day following.
That works.
Thank you.
All right.
All right, great, thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks for waiting out with us, Craig. All right. Long night tonight. Anything for commission business tonight? No, everybody's tired, I'm sure.
No, it's
All right.
okay. We're good.
Yeah,
We had to do this. So
Yeah,
it
we had to do
was,
it.
you know,
Yeah,
I
sure.
think we're not.
No, I just, yep.
I had one quick thing. We've all probably read the articles. I know that there's a committee that's looking at the pay raises and things for the town board members. Are they considering any of the other appointed positions in town?
No.
I'll ask them.
No,
Okay.
Do you want to ask them
It
about
said-
planning
I
board?
thought it said elected officials. We're not
Yeah, it
elected,
is
we're
We're
elected.
appointed,
Yeah.
correct. It's only elected,
It's only
right?
elected.
Okay.
Do you guys feel like you need a bigger study?
In the past, we got one raise because the town controller figured out that we were being paid less than the hourly minimum wage. And that was a no-no, and he suggested it. And then another time we got a raise because the town planner thought it was due. I think it was
I
Kathy.
only remember one race since like 27
Yeah.
years.
It's been a long time.
I don't know.
Yeah, I remember one only, and that was Luke Smith timeframe when board members went from $600 to $1,000 a year.
It might have been,
And I
there were two. There was one that
I don't remember any other one.
Costa started, and there was one I'm pretty sure
Right.
Kathy did.
It seems like, I don't know, but if they've got somebody who's reviewing all the stuff, like maybe they could look into that too, just to see if it's fair and, you
Mhm.
know, kind of the same as what's happening all around.
Right. It's not, I mean, not a money grab or anything. I've just, several people have asked me, like, are you included in this? And I said, no.
No.
And I
Yeah.
try to explain it, but then they'll say, well, this municipality, this board gets such and such. And I said, well,
Are they, is it more than
Town
what you
of-
guys
town
get?
of North
Yeah.
Is it more?
North Elba.
What is it sound of North?
Yeah, there you
I
go.
know there
Yeah.
are planning boards that get paid more.
So that would bring us up to what, 50
And then I
cents an
think
hour?
Ross is the next
Something.
one.
Well, on a night like tonight.
Pretty sure you guys like make about 25 cents an hour.
As we all know, we do it for the satisfaction of service and residents, not for the money.
That's right. That is a serious statement. Yeah, I agree with that.
If you're doing it for the money, you're in the wrong place.
That's right. But thanks for raising it, David.
Okay, all right, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Moved by Ms. Gold, seconded by Mr.
Second.
Chris or Nancy, seconded by Ms. Strang. All those in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Not going to ask if anybody's opposed. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you. Thanks, Linda.
Thanks. Sorry. You should have